You're listening to Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Dark Matter Radio Network. Don't run and hide. Don't be afraid. Don't turn away any longer. The truth will set you free. And now, your host, the captain of conspiracy, the prince of paranormal. This ain't your daddy's radio network show. This is Jimmy Church, Fade to Black.
All right. Here we go. Are you ready? It's Fade to Black. We're back. Let's get comfortable. Today's Thursday, April 10th, 98 days into the new year. Live from the JP Motorsports Studios right here in Burbank, California. Hot Burbank, California. For KJCR and the Dark Matter Radio Network, I am your host, Jimmy Church. Let's get it cracking. And you know how we start out every show. A big salute to the proud men and women in uniform all around the world, fighting the good fight for us. Without them, there is no me. There is no you. There is no us. And you couldn't hear me right now. Think about it. All right, let's go. Let's get it cracking. It's cracking number one, Keith. Stray Cats guitarist and singer Brian Setzer is 55 years old today. I'll never forget the first time I heard Stray Cat strut back in the 80s on the radio. Heard that song, and I thought, man, I thought I knew everything. And this is, what is this, from the 50s? Sounds like Elvis. I never heard this song before, and it's good. And I found out it was like brand new. Blew my mind. He's a great guy, great player. 55. Our dead guy's birthdays today. Joseph Pulitzer. Born in 1847 and died in 1911. Actor Chuck Connors of The Rifleman, born in 1921, died in 1992. And actor Harry Morgan, who played Colonel Sherman Potter on MASH, he lived a good one, 1915 to 2011. For me, you know, I was a little young when MASH was on, but dude made me laugh. Thought he was pretty funny. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. You know the drill. You know what to do, so go and do it. If you are on Dark Matter right now, that means you're probably on the Fade to Black page, staring at nothing. So go and scroll up and follow us on Twitter. Head over to YouTube. Subscribe. We're about to break 1,000 subscribers, by the way, on YouTube. And with absolutely, what's cool about that? And all those views and everything, no promotion. I haven't done anything. Just let that YouTube channel just kind of cruise and ride. And it's been really, really, really cool. Thank you for that. And that's where we keep all the shows posted until we finally get podcasting straightened out. I don't know why podcasting got moved to the back burner considering all the email and requests we got. But we'll get around to it, I promise. But in the meantime, we have YouTube, okay? Tonight, we're going to have open lines. We've got Peter Robbins on tonight, and I'm really looking forward to this. Been working on this for a while. And the other Rendlesham stuff that is happening next month, you know, we just couldn't get any Rendlesham action. Nick Pope and his book and so forth. Well, that's next month. This month, we got the orig, we got the OG, we got the guy, Peter Robbins. And I'll tell you more about what we're going to do a little bit later on. But I'm excited about that. So we're going to take your calls. 323-825-5045. That's the call-in number, 323-825-5045. If you need instructions, just go over to jimmychurchradio.com, and everything is there. The Skype number, if you want to Skype in, you can do that too. That is Fade to Black 14. I'll be taking your emails throughout the show tonight. As always, Jimmy at jimmychurchradio.com. Producers here are sending email in right now. So make it good. Make it good. Get it to me. You'd be surprised how many get rejected. So make it good. We've got that new theater page up at jimmychurchradio.com. And also, last night we were talking about Nancy Talbot and the new crop circles that have popped up over in Holland. Well, we've got a gallery up tonight, folks. Go over to jimmychurchradio.com right now, scroll down, and there is a gallery for Nancy Talbot. It's right there, and it's very cool. And there's an article. So go and read and check out those pictures. And you tell me what you think. One of the best shows, all of the shows are good, but one of the best shows for me personally was the Nancy Talbot show. And the feedback and the pictures and everything that she did that night was one of the most comprehensive, technical shows we have ever done. And if you missed the show, go over to YouTube and find it and watch it. All of the original photographs in that original gallery with Nancy Talbot is still up on the website. We do that for every guest, but it's still there. And if you ever want to know what crop circles are, the real ones, not the fake ones, the real ones, and what is behind it, her research with BLT research is extraordinary and deep. Well, this new stuff going on over in Holland with Robert Vanderbroek right now is pretty trippy. So the new article is there. The new photographs are there. Go over to jimmychurchradio.com. Check it out for yourself. Nancy does not play. Nancy is no joke. I'm one of the biggest crop circle skeptics out there, but Nancy is the real deal. And what she does is scientific. Go and check out those pictures right now. They're on the front of jimmychurchradio.com. We've also got the gallery up tonight for Peter Robbins, and we'll go over that in a little bit. So with that, I will take our first break. When we come back, I wanted to comment really quick, little off subject, but with me, it's always on subject, about Kiss. Kiss and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It's going down tonight. And the controversy, I've just got to chime in because I have a very strong opinion about this. I know what this show is about, but it's also my show. And I'm a musician. Not only that, but when I grew up, one of my favorite things to do, my favorite things in the world, would be every Saturday I had to wash the car for my parents out in the driveway. That was my job. That was my gig. I got like $5. I think I had to wash both of them. But my favorite thing to do, because it wasn't free money and I had to go work for it, so I was always irritated. But I knew that my dad and my mom just hated Kiss. Oh, my dad's a musician professionally. And Kiss and him, two different planets. So I would go into the living room. We had a record player that, you could play like 6 records at a time. You remember that? You'd stack them up on the top and then they would play. I would take 6 Kiss albums and stack them up on that thing. And I would take the speakers from the living room and put them out on the patio. And I would crank Kiss. I would crank Kiss for about 3 straight hours while I was out there washing cars. And I knew that my dad was just in his bedroom just boiling, and I loved every minute of it. It was great. But That's Kiss. The original Kiss, the original members, that is Kiss. And for Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons to put up this fight with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, what they don't get, what Paul and Gene don't understand, I understand their view, but what they don't understand about the fans, Kiss is the original members. Those were the great songs. We could care less about all the new stuff. Seriously. And I was watching him on CNN today, Paul Stanley, and I was just like, man, this is bothering me. I'm going to talk about it tonight. So now I vented. Paul and Gene, you have to understand. The original Kiss is Kiss. Not what's going to go down tonight. And we'll see. All this big protest, let's see what happens if he says something live. We'll find out, and I will be reporting on it tomorrow. I promise. This is Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, Peter Robbins. When I come back after the break, we will get to it all. Get to the news, a couple of other things, a couple of Jimmy rants, and then we'll be back with Peter Robbins. And I'll tell you exactly what we're going to talk about when we come back after this. Stay with us, everybody. Shoot me an email to jimmy@jimmychurchradio.com. Follow us on Twitter @jchurchradio. This is Fade to Black on the Dark Matter Radio Network. Jimmy Church. I'll be back right after this. Stay with us, everybody.
You're listening to Jimmy Church Fade to Black on the Dark Matter Radio Network.
What's up, revolutionaries? It's me, Jimmy Church. Do you have an IRS or state tax issue? Well, I did, and I called national tax experts. My problems were fixed, done, fini, and man, I gotta tell you, it was a relief. National Tax Experts are a recognized tax office that services clients in all 50 states. Doesn't matter where you live. Give them a call. I'm telling you, they take the time to understand each and every client's individual financial status as well as their financial goals. And that's exactly what you need, my brother, when you're taking on the evil 3-letter. So, seriously, give them a call today at 1-877-909-5444. Again, 1-877-909-5444, or go check out their website, www.nattaxexperts.com. That's NATTAXEXPERTS.com. Tell them Jimmy sent you.
This is KJCR at JimmyChurchRadio.com.
On the Dark Matter Radio Network.
All right, everybody, welcome back. KJCR, Fade to Black on the Dark Matter Radio Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. It is Thursday. Tomorrow night, we're going to have author Annie Jacobson to discuss the new Chris Carter series she's got called Area 51, based on her book. And we'll also talk about her new book, Operation Paperclip. Got a phone call coming in really quick, so I'm going to go ahead and grab that. Oh, I cut the music. Who's calling? Okay, you're on a tape delay. Are you there? I can hear me in the background.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Who's calling? I said, yes, I can. Who's calling?
Hey, my name is Mike Anderson. How you doing, Mr. Church?
How you doing, Mike?
Doing good, doing good. I got a question. When it comes to Art Bell and the thing he's got going on with the satellite radio, do you think that does that non-compete agreement mean that maybe you could have him on as a guest sometime?
It is a question that is floating around daily. And right now, Keith is listening. So,
well,
and the point is, we're investigating that. And would we like Art on this show? Absolutely. And him as a guest, would that interfere with his non-compete? We're investigating that. Absolutely. And it is a question that it goes on all day long. And I appreciate it, Mike. But
I know that since Coast to Coast has no longer has their regular Saturday night MC,
right.
I have no reason to listen to that station anymore. So I hope when Art does come back that you get to stay on this network, because I discovered you only from this network, and you're just rocking it, man.
Well, I appreciate it, Mike. Now check this out. And some people are going to think that this is some kind of stage call. Do I know you? No.
Not at all. You haven't even accepted my Skype request yet as a friend.
Okay, all right, and we'll take care of that tonight, I promise. But as you were speaking, this email just came in. Check this out. It says, Jimmy, after 30 years of teaching with some Army time in between, I retired several years ago. However, a local school system has been contracted me near nonstop to do substituting teaching. On Wednesday, I covered grade 8 math, picked up my wife at the airport here in Delaware, and at 11:43 p.m., I arrived back at our house. Needing to unwind, I did something I haven't done in months. I turned on Coast to Coast. After listening to your Dark Matter broadcast, I couldn't believe how boring George Norrie seemed. I turned him off after 25 minutes. Oh,
I mean, all he wants to do, and I don't want to just sit here and bash Coast to Coast.
I don't either.
I don't. What you're about.
I don't.
But all they do nowadays is sell seeds and gold and Berkey water filters.
Well, this is my opinion, and although I voiced it a little bit here on the show, I do want to keep a little bit away from that out of respect, because Art created that. And
very much so.
Yeah, and so that to me, I have a very, very special place in my heart, like we all do with Coast to Coast. And I think all of us dial in once in a while, hoping the magic is back, but it's never there. And I agree with you. After John B. left Saturday nights, that was the reason why I would tune in on Saturday nights. Love John B.
Right.
I didn't agree with him, but you don't listen to a show to agree with somebody. You listen to a show to be inspired and maybe disagree, because if you agree with everything, it's boring. Who cares?
Very much so.
Yeah, you want to just maybe want to break your radio sometimes because of what you're listening to. You want to be inspired. But the other thing is this. I love George Knapp. I really love George Knapp. I think Knapp is a guy that is due, but there's not enough of him on Coast to Coast. And George, I think for all of us, and I'm speaking, I'm sure the forums are going to light up tonight with this, but with George, the first night that he was on the air, after Art, I was like, who is this? What? So I didn't like him from the word go, just because he was the guy replacing Art. That's the truth. So
now get this. Think about how this would be. I'm sure you know that, from listening to John B. Wells, that he has very much the same cadence and tone and sound that Art Bell did. Could you imagine the two of them talking and trying to figure out who's actually saying what?
The thing is about John B. is he's scary smart. And sometimes I'm a little bit intimidated by that, because I try to read as much as I can. I try to know as much as I can, because I'm interested in things. And John B., sometimes I would go, where does he get this? He's so smart. And I don't know why he left Coast to Coast. I don't know what the exit papers were. I don't know what happened. I don't know what went down. But I can't imagine that the ratings went up.
He's spoken about it. From what I've found stuff where he says why he left. And
yeah.
things along those lines.
Well, again, I've read the same stuff too, but he's being very nice.
Very much so.
Yeah, that's only what we know. What went down there at Clear Channel? That's what went. No. We'll never find that out.
I'm sure it's the sugar-coated Technicolor version.
That's right. He still has a career in front of him, and he's not in any way bash. I mean, look, it helped him. You know, we would have never have known about John B. Wells if it wasn't for Coast to Coast, at least at that level. So, well, hey, Mike, I got a show to do.
Yeah, well, hey,
so I'm going to get to it.
Thanks for taking my call.
Hey,
you have a good evening, and I'll be listening.
And I really appreciate it. And Keith, you heard it. Okay, let's get Art on as a guest, and I appreciate it.
You have a good night, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Bye-bye. All right, so where was I? Oh, the music. All right, let's get to it. So tomorrow night is Annie Jacobson. Tonight, Peter Robbins. And a couple of things really quick. I want to get to some news and some other stuff. Oh, really quick. So with the Malaysian airline, 2.8 miles underwater, these pings, apparently. Now, I just made a few quick notes today. And before I say, we know nothing, well, check this out. Today it's just one more day of nothingness. But if you peel back a little bit and check this out, just listen to these facts. 2.8 miles underwater, the pings. How many feet is that? How many feet are in a mile? What is it, 5,000? I don't know. 10,000 at 2 miles, so 2.8. We're talking, 15,000 feet, okay? Listen to this fact, this factoid. The buoys have sensors that can detect signals at least 1,000 feet below the surface. What? What good is that, one asks? The source is confident that the technology has been tested at a much deeper depth. The Australian Defence Force said the signal detected was not the 37.5 kHz frequency consistent with the pingers from the flight data recorders, but in a range that suggests strongly that it is from something man-made. Huh? What? This is what they're feeding us. Authorities analyzed the signals picked up over the weekend and concluded they probably came from specific electronic equipment rather than from marine life. Chew on that. And then, and I'm serious, this is what we're being fed. Now, apparently, the Malaysians immediately after no contact with the plane, day one, they immediately searched west when everybody else was searching north and east for 3 days. The Malaysians knew that plane turned left and went west, went back over Malaysia and up and around. And they knew this. They didn't tell anybody. So we wasted all those resources, everything looking north and east in the direction the plane was originally headed. And the Malaysians didn't say anything. They searched west. The story is as funky as it gets for me. And the thought of, one of the thoughts that I have, and I've got to get all of this out so I can get to Peter Robbins at the bottom of the hour, is I really feel Diego Garcia is right there. Big Air Force Base. And that plane was rogue. And we know what happened in 9/11. And that plane skirted radar, and everybody knew. Everybody knew. And I think we scrambled some planes. And I think that the only, one of the producers here said this to me last night, so it's stolen, but I'm going to share it with you. The only people really that know what happened are the pilot that pulled that trigger and the people on that plane. That's why we don't know anything. Somebody's sworn to secrecy. Something happened. I cannot believe there's no debris. I just can't believe it. It's being done on purpose. And that's how I feel. And as dark as it is, that's where I'm going. All right, let's move on. Let's move on to happy stuff. Check out how ridiculous this story is. A team of scientists, this also from CNN, soon to not be my news source. I was talking with a bunch of guys here from the network and a couple of other hosts and broadcasters. We were talking a couple of weeks ago about where we go, and everybody was like, for news. And everybody at this little round table that we were having said, well, really, we go to CNN first. Everything else is a little slanted and everything else is a little twisted. CNN seems to be the straightest. And after this 370 debacle, soon to be my last, listen to this story. A team of scientists has concluded that a controversial scrap of papyrus that purportedly quotes Jesus referring to my wife is not fake, according to the Harvard Theological Review. Wide range of scientific testing indicates that the papyrus fragment containing the words Jesus said to them, my wife, is an ancient document. Now, so I thought, okay, all right. Ancient papyrus, Jesus being quoted. This has got to be really old. The document dates to between 659 and 859. 800 years after, 20 years after Jesus died on the cross. So, where's the quote from? It's just written on a piece of papyrus. Why even write this story? So you've confirmed that it's 1,200 years old. Who cares? I don't even understand why even write this article. Why is it important? CNN killing me. I got so excited. I really did. I got excited. I was like, oh man, really? They're going to date this to 30. No. 859. Hunters claim in Australia to have captured Bigfoot. Two Yahweh researchers claim to have filmed the strange Bigfoot creature. I've seen the video. You can go check it out on YouTube. I didn't want to post it, but maybe I'll change my mind. The mysterious beast with glowing eyes was dubbed the Morning Visitor. They coaxed Bigfoot with apples, and they got him to come up to the camera. And it's pretty cool. So go and check it out. I don't know what to make of it. It's a little fuzzy. It's a little dark. But it's pretty trippy. The strange Mars light pictures that are going around on the web continues to fascinate everybody, including myself. All kinds of theories are out there now. But I'm standing my ground. I went and read, I got a bunch of email today about it. And everybody listening to the show last night. And the official sources that are trying to say that it's gas or it's a reflection or it's cosmic rays, those are just very poor excuses for something that is very obvious. And I went to a couple of websites today. I'm not going to make any quotes. I'm not going to do it from these various websites. That's not what this show is about. What this show is about is my opinion and teaching. And I'm here to tell you that those pictures, that is something real. I don't know what it is, but it's not swamp gas. All right. Hey, go check out those pictures from Nancy Talbot. I'm really the stuff with Robert. Seriously, go over to jimmychurchradio.com and check that out. Comment, and please understand what Nancy Talbot is about when you go and check that stuff out. Let's see. Oh, today. Okay, we're at the bottom of the hour. I just want to get this in really quick, and then we will break for Peter Robbins. Today I saw for the first time a bunch of episodes of Uncovering Aliens, the new Michael Barra series. And before you think I'm going to go south, it ain't that bad. It's not that bad. I thought it was going to be different. You know, whatever your opinion of Michael is, and mine isn't that good. You know, that's Hoaxland and the moon and Mars that have messed Michael Barra up for me. But the show and what Michael does and his team is not that bad. I actually enjoyed it. Now, I went through 3 episodes today. So where they go from here, we'll see. But it's not that bad. If you get a chance to check it out, please do. With that, take a quick break. This is Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. KJCR on the Dark Matter Radio Network. When we come back, Peter Robbins, Rendlesham. We're going to do a little Rendlesham. We're going to do some Comet Ison and his most fascinating UFO pictures of all time when we come back. And the gloves are off. I'll be back right after this. Stay with us.
Way out here, we listen to Jimmy Church on the Dark Matter Radio Network.
Dark Matter.
Dark Matter. Dark Matter. Dark Matter. Dark Matter.
You're listening to Fade to Black
on the Dark Matter Radio Network.
¿Qué tal, mis amigos? Yo soy Mario Carson, el tiburón, y los invito para que escuchen a mi buen amigo Jimmy Church Radio. ¡Claro que sí!
Oi, oi, I'm Reese Evans. You're listening to Jimmy Church. This is Revolution. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution is on radio. Ciao.
All right, everybody, welcome back. KJCR, Fade to Black. Let's get this show cracking. On the Dark Matter Radio Network. Tomorrow night, Annie Jacobson, Area 51, her new Chris Carter series, Operation Paperclip. It's going to be a good show tomorrow night. Shoot us an email right now to jimmy@jimmychurchradio.com if you would like to pierce the veil of the producers here and get to Peter Robbins. Make it good. Also on Twitter, doing Twitter right now, @JChurchRadio. You want to call in, we will open up the lines in a little bit. 323-825-5045. And if you want to Skype in, that is Fade2Black14. All right, let's get it going. Here we go. Peter Robbins is an investigative reporter, writer, lecturer, best known for his UFO-related papers, columns, articles, editorials, commentaries, lectures, and media appearances. He is a regular fixture on radio and has appeared as a guest on and been a consultant to numerous television shows and documentaries. He is also co-author, along with Larry Warren, of the highly acclaimed British bestseller Left at Eastgate, a first-hand account of the Rendlesham Forest UFO incident, its cover-up and investigation. He was born in New York City, studied art, design, and theater at the University of Bridgeport in Connecticut, receiving his BFA from New York City's School of Visual Arts, where he taught painting for more than a dozen years. I would like to welcome to the program right now the man himself, Mr. Peter Robbins. Welcome to the show, sir.
Hi, Jimmy. It's really good to be on with you tonight.
It's going to be great. It's going to be great. Now, really quick, I always get my little disclaimer out of the way with all of the guests, so we'll start here, which is this is just a long-form conversation. You and I are just sitting in my living room, kicking back, no questions, no premeditation, no notes, and wherever we end up is where we end up, and hopefully we'll still be friends. How's that?
Nice one.
Yeah.
Works for me.
and you know, when we were talking earlier, and I totally respect this, we had our little conversation earlier today, and you said, Jimmy, whatever, let's go. Don't throw me any softballs. I'm tired of that. Let's have fun tonight. And my response to that was, this is the thing. I have been interested in, and everybody that, all of the, listeners to this show, they know how I feel about Rendlesham. They do. They know that I am a believer that something went down, something extraordinary went down, but the story itself, the core of everything, because there's so many people involved, has just spun out of control. And I just wish that it the original, and that's where I'm coming from. And that's why, having you on is so exciting for me, because first off, I don't know it all. I never pretend to. But this is a case that I have studied since it first started to pop up in the 80s. And so with that, you ready to have a little fun? Let's do this? Mm-hmm. Okay. You got involved with the case. Now, this is a couple of little softballs, actually. Let's just set the set the tone for things. You've been involved with this case for over 30 years. Am I correct?
Over 25.
Yeah, 25 years. That is a long time.
It is.
So, how did you first get pulled in, and was it Larry that that you got involved, or how did that originally kick off?
Yeah, great question to start. And before we do, I just want to send out one shout out to my friend Dennis Abramson in the Netherlands, who connected me up with you. And hi, Dennis. Hope you're doing well.
Oh, absolutely.
The answer to your question, in October of 1983, this story busted wide open. On the front page of Sunday, October 2nd or October 3rd, I'd have to check, 1983's News of the World, at the time the largest tabloid in the world, now right and properly destroyed by Rupert Murdoch and his crew, but at the time a very powerful newspaper. I had about a dozen years' experience in the field at that time, had written a number of articles, given some talks, but like everybody in ufology, was intrigued by this new British case and began to follow it as best I could. Now, the following year, your listeners who do follow this subject are aware that there was a huge group of sightings in the area of Westchester, New York, a county just north of Manhattan, primarily of large triangular-shaped craft. It was so virulent, there were so many sightings, that the community got together and they held an open town meeting. It lasted all day. It took place in the auditorium of the local high school. Alan Hynek was there, Whitley Strieber was there, Bud Hopkins, and on, and pantheon of East Coast researchers and personalities at the time. And at a certain point there came a break, and I went outside to grab a smoke. It was a beautiful afternoon. And I saw a knot of people on the high school lawn, and I just made my way to it. And in the middle was a young guy, very earnest, answering questions of those kind of circled around him. And after a few questions, I realized, holy moly, this is that guy. This is the witness who had given his account to the News of the World, essentially the whistleblower, the guy who had busted it open. And I did my best to read him, so to say, as he continued to answer questions. He seemed honest, truthful. He seemed to be answering questions the best he could. And, authentic military witnesses who can really back up their accounts are not that common. And I began to wonder what it would take to stand there and deliver these impromptu answers to the variety of questions that were coming at him from several dozen people. And if you could lie and do this, I always have to play devil's advocate and come from my inner skeptic.
Sure.
And I felt he was really telling the truth. And at a certain point, somebody yelled out to us that the program was beginning again, and everybody drifted off back into the high school. And it's funny, Larry and I both remember me just standing there and being the last person to leave. And at a certain point, there was nobody left but him and me, and he looked at me like, shrugged his shoulders. And I stuck out my hand, I smiled at him, and I said, good luck. And we shook hands, and that was that. Jump ahead almost exactly 3 years. In July of 1987, MUFON held a major conference at Washington University in American University, in Washington, D.C. And it marked the 40th anniversary of the birth of the so-called modern era of UFOs, Kenneth Arnold and the Roswell event.
Right.
And Larry was a featured speaker. I was selected to be on a panel about the abduction phenomena that Dr. David Jacobs was chairing. The reason I was selected was because I was already working as Bud Hopkins' assistant, which I did for more than half of our 35-year friendship.
Right.
And also because the thing that had gotten me into this work, Jimmy, was an unforgettable afternoon and conversation with my late sister Helen, who at that time shared with me what I can only now describe as archetypical abduction-related memories. And to say that my life had changed overnight at that point would be an understatement. My life changed completely in about 90 seconds, and it was never the same after that. And really, Helen is the reason that I got into this work and why I remain in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard Larry talk, and at a certain point, one of the MUFON people came up to him as he was speaking and whispered something in his ear, and he reacted with a certain amount of anger. I think what had happened, frankly, was that speakers had run over and they had to cut somewhere, and they were cutting his time. And he did not like that and said he had to stop, and anybody that wanted to hear the rest of his account could join him in the hallway in the lobby of where we were having the conference.
Right.
And I'm sure at least 100 of us left the room, and he gave us the rest of his talk right there. The next day, on Sunday, we ran into each other in the hallway and chatted briefly, remembered meeting each other 3 years before. He had heard me, I had heard him, we both had agendas. I wanted to do an interview with him, and for whatever reasons, he thought I was the person to write his book with him. And he came down to my place in Manhattan the next weekend. I got one of the interviews of my life.
Right.
On the Sunday, he proposed to me that we take on this project, and we shook hands on it. And I have to tell you, I had no idea of what I was getting into. And had I known the full sweep of what the next 9 years were going to be like, I probably would not have done it. I am so glad I didn't know, because it's something I am very proud of. And I think we produced a remarkable book in that decade that we worked together.
The book stands on its own, and it obviously, well received. But there's a few issues with it. But with a subject like that, there's always going to be, something. So we'll get to that in a second. Mm-hmm. But why do you think? What is the fascination with the public at large? You don't have to be a UFO believer to be fascinated with the Rendlesham subject, and it seems to have really run off the rails the last couple of years. There's something on cable. There's something it's like a 24-hour news cycle now with Rendlesham. What is the fascination with it, in your opinion?
It is the damnedest thing. This is now, on a certain level, a dated case. It occurred almost 33 and a half years ago.
That's right.
So what is the fascination? And in fact, I should say here that not 6 weeks ago, Larry and I were back on location. He's been an expatriate since 2000. He lives in Liverpool.
Right.
And we met back down in Suffolk at the scene of the crime, so to say, and shot part of a program that will be on a certain network this fall.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, the thing that keeps it in the public eye and so compelling, even for people that do not follow this subject, is it has really something from every aspect of UFO studies caught up in the events of late December 1980, from multiply witnessed, genuinely anomalous, unidentified flying objects, some of which came down into the Rendlesham Forest, left impressions and background radiation traces in the ground. They were observed to shine lights, what I can only describe as the equivalent of like an industrial laser, on the first night down into the weapons storage area at RAF Bentwaters. I should also say here that an important backstory is that at this time, and this is now fully established, the United States had a large stockpile of nuclear ordnance in that zone, in that weapons storage area in Suffolk, in full violation of our treaty with the United Kingdom. No one less than retired Deputy Base Commander Charles I. Halt told Larry and I in person when we met with him in the 90s that although he couldn't explain it, these beams of light somehow adversely affected the ordnance, his quote. Robert Hastings in 2008 wrote an outstanding book called UFOs and Nukes that many of your listeners are aware of that documents many such incidents. And in this case, on that night, there was so much moisture in the air that the light beam caught on, billions of little droplets of water, and you could see it drawn like a line. You could see them drawn like a line into the WSA. Colonel Halt and his men, 2 nights later, experienced a similar phenomena in the woods. We know that it adversely affected the ordnance. We know from Larry's and my investigation that whatever sat on the exact precise spot where his event took place on the third night made such an extraordinary amount of physiological changes to the soil that it remains the best physical evidence of the event itself. Because it happened in a military context, there was a paper trail. Many military witnesses, a number of whom have now come forward to us and to other investigators. Also missing time. Also a genuine and very dark cover-up. Also civilian witnesses. Also key individuals who were involved as military eyewitnesses. Forget about the shock of the event itself, what they were put through after the fact by elements within the intelligence community. I feel it was a field arm of the National Security Agency who were taken against their will, subdued by drug and other methods, and had false images and scenarios implanted in their mind to confuse them, put the fear of God into them, any way you want to interpret it. And I feel that part of the logic for the forces that be there was to so upfuse and confuse their real memories with absolutely over-the-top ones that if they ever did break security, and these men were all told not to talk about this, Larry immediately put the truth ahead of his orders, and that cost him holy hell, that if they ever did talk about it, they'd sound like lunatics. But it doesn't always work that way. So we have here so many elements all caught into one big story in an area that had already established itself over the decades as a location with a high incidence of UFO sightings in the UK and other anomalous activity in and around the Rendlesham Forest.
With Nick Pope and his book that's coming out in about a week, and I know that you've read. I haven't read it yet. Nick will be on the show in about a week and a half. But which now I know, and I'm laughing nervously because this is a funky question.
Hit me with your best shot.
Which book do we believe? Which account? And
there are other books as well.
Well, that's right, of course, and we can. Yeah, exactly. And so, do we have to cross-reference and get the best rounded story out of everybody's story, or is one version stronger than the others? And I know that you've read Nick's book.
Well, I'm actually, as we speak, I am in the course of reading it and writing the first half of a 2-part review that will appear in a online publication that I'm a columnist for, UFO Truth Magazine, an outstanding publication coming out of Yorkshire.
Absolutely.
Edited by Gary Hasseltine, perhaps our greatest forensic analyst of UFO evidence, a retired detective. The main thing to remember here, Jimmy, is that we're dealing with a series of separate events and incidents that occurred over 3 consecutive nights. And as such, it's not a matter of who to believe. It's a matter of differing accounts overlapping each other and completely separate from each other. Where things, I think, get problematic is when individuals who were either involved in one night or another night say what they definitively feel or believe, or may even substitute for fact, commenting on somebody else's experience is where we get into trouble. Everybody has an opinion, and in this country more so. I'm one of those people who actually feel that in order to have an opinion worthy of any respect, you should actually educate yourself about the subject at hand. The book that is coming out next week, which is authored by, as you say, Nick Pope, old friend of mine, about the accounts of 2 of the other witnesses, Jim Peniston and John Burroughs. They were involved on the first night, and John was also involved in other aspects of the story. So their account of the first night, I would say, is going to be about as definitive as any account of the first night is ever going to be, unless other first night witnesses come forward. But right. John and Jim had a very singular experience. I have to say I resent the fact that they have made up their mind about what did or didn't happen to Larry when they were not involved and not there.
Right.
And this is part of the problem, I think.
Well, there's also the controversy that if Larry was even there at all. Well,
that is based on myth, rumor, a certain amount of mean-spiritedness.
Okay.
And I think a very concerted drive to discredit him. In fact, a small point, but a very real one, that irritates the heck out of me is Jim and John have referred to Larry as one of the first whistleblowers, and that's a quote. And Nick uses that quote in describing Larry's involvement in the case.
He was the first to come forward.
Well, that's it. There was no one of the first. He was the first.
Right.
And there was no one else for years. And that guy took it on the chin for years. He was attacked within the field and without. And it is such a disservice to the truth and such kind of a passive-aggressive acknowledgement of his involvement. So I spent 9 years of my life, to the exclusion of everything, as in everything else, doing what I could to learn everything I could about his involvement, to be specific, and about the general case more generally over those years. I knew that my reputation as a writer was going to be attached to whether or not he was telling the truth and whether or not I could document that in no uncertain terms. In fact, on that very memorable Sunday afternoon when he presented me with the idea of co-authoring this book with him, he did it in a rather unusual way, and it's worth noting here. He said, among other things, that he would give me everything that he had collected on the case, all of his military paperwork that he had, the phone numbers of all of his old friends and his mother, everybody, the contact information for everybody that he knew that was involved, and that he invited me to prove him a liar, delusional, a wannabe, as Charles Halt has referred to him, and that if he could do it, of course, it might make for something of a schizophrenic book, but, in the words of the late, great Watergate Judge John Sirica, let the truth fall where it may.
Right.
And by the other token, he hoped that I would find supporting evidence to back up his account.
Absolutely.
Which I did in spades.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's, what was the first document that you discovered that you went, okay, all right, I'm safe?
Yeah. Well, that document was already discovered, and that account bears witness as well. That is a one-page memo on the events of late December 1980, written about 3 weeks after the fact by then Deputy Base Commander Lieutenant Colonel Halt. There is no question, and certainly Halt concedes this point, that the events were minimized, compressed, redacted, but there it is on an Air Force letterhead, and it documents the reality of the event in no uncertain terms. Now, the only reason that came into public hands is that Larry left the service with a fully honorable discharge 6 months after the event. John and Jim remained in for respectively 27 and 20 years, respectively.
Mm-hmm.
They served their full hitch and more. Larry identified himself almost immediately as somebody who was a troublemaker. He was not following orders. He put, again, the truth ahead of his orders. And there was concern for him after a while that he might not be safe if he remained in the service, and certainly that he had identified himself as a problem as far as the Air Force and the intelligence community was concerned. And the fact was that he was already a victim of post-traumatic stress around this, as are John and Jim, and as Larry remains. These guys went through the equivalent of hard combat in terms of what they were put through, and it still is with them, and it makes me furious. They should all be recognized by our government and the public as heroic individuals that had the courage to ultimately or directly come forward. And instead, they were treated absolutely abhorrently by our government for being in the wrong place at the right time. So the Halt document got out because by 1982, Larry felt he had to speak to somebody about this who had some background in ufology. And the person he ultimately turned to, who he was introduced to by a woman that he had read about in an article on abductions in the Hartford Courant, Connecticut's oldest newspaper, that was Betty Andreasen. Betty introduced him to Larry Fawcett, a respected UFO investigator, and more, a Connecticut State Police lieutenant. Warren gave Fawcett every bit of information he could remember on the events in question. And Fawcett took that information, and only that information, put it into the form of a Freedom of Information Act action, filed it, and that caused the release of the document, which ultimately a courtesy copy was forwarded to Jenny Randalls, a well-known UFO writer in England,
mm-hmm.
who shared it with a colleague of hers, Harry Harris, who, without any authorization or permission, turned around and sold it for quite a hefty sum to the News of the World and kept the money, and the story broke with that document and Larry Warren's account heading the information.
How could Peniston and Halt, and apparently Nick, we'll save that for another, I have to ask him directly. You can't.
Mm-hmm.
But is there, for them to say that Larry wasn't even there, is it because they have a way to back that up? Like, was Larry's name not, was he away from the base? Was there a reason? It's, they have to back up that statement with something.
Yes. Well, it's been completely discredited now as far as I'm concerned, and really everybody that I'm aware of who has studied this case, although I still hear it parroted occasionally. Let's take it back again to 1983. when that story broke in the news of the world, Charles Halt's name was front and center. And within a very short time, English newspapers were even referring to him in headlines on the case as, quote-unquote, the UFO colonel.
Right.
This caused him an understandable amount of personal and professional distress. There's no question that brother officers gave him a ribbing behind his back, that it did not help his personal life. He was a lieutenant colonel when this happened, and 12 years later when he retired, he was a full colonel. That's hardly a huge amount of advancement, although certainly a very respectable rank. Larry, in essence, without the permission of Halt, Peniston, Burroughs, outed them all, and the resentment was very real. I am convinced that Halt, who again remained a senior officer over Peniston and Burroughs for many years after this, did his best to sow seeds of doubt about Warren's involvement, to underscore the fact that he had outed them all by name, and nurse along a great deal of ill will. Charles and I have gone at this, and he has never fully conceded the point, but I think it's human nature, and there is that history. The fact is that Larry Warren was on a 2-day furlough on the first 2 nights that these events were going on.
Right.
He returned and went on guard duty on the third night. Late that night, he had his own experience, but he was not only on the base, but every charge. Originally, it was he didn't have his PRP.
But when you say the third night, Peter, you're referring to the night of the 28th?
I am.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I just want to be clear. And actually, there's probably about 5% of our listeners right now that haven't heard of Rendlesham. The other 95 have.
That's impressive.
Yeah. Well, you don't have to. Like I said, you don't have to be a fan of ufology to know what this case is about. But in its basic form, let's just talk about actually what happened. Let's like I said, just in an overview type of thing. What happened on the 26th? Nothing happened on the 27th, and then what happened on the 28th? So for everybody, just really quickly, what happened on the 26th?
Okay, let me give you kind of a sketch.
Yeah.
On that first night, unidentifieds were observed over the area, and again, this is a very heavily militarized area at a particularly tense moment during the Cold War, which is the second kind of backstory that adds unnecessary but very real drama.
Well, you know what?
UFO.
Actually, you're right, and you just made me think. Of everybody, just go to jimmychurchradio.com. You know what to do. The gallery is there in its normal place at the front of jimmychurchradio.com. Just scroll down, and Peter, I'm hoping you have a computer too. So if you scroll down, we have your gallery right there, Peter Robbins, Rendlesham, CIA. And there's some shots of the base here, and that's why the first 5 photographs. Oh, by the way, 2 of your photographs that you sent us, we couldn't. They wouldn't load for some reason. But, but it doesn't matter. So we have these first 5 photographs are of Rendlesham. So really quick, as we get into the I'm trying to think of the correct word. The general events of what happened, and then we'll continue to go deep. What is this first photograph? Obviously, those are weapon storage bunkers, right?
Yes, it's an area that I photographed at a distance for the first time a quarter century ago, and had I been caught doing it, I would have been in great trouble, as would my telephoto lens. 2 months ago, 6 weeks ago, for the very first time, because of this shoot that Larry and I were doing in the UK, the production company paid the fees necessary, because this is now a decommissioned base and privately owned, to get us into the former nuclear weapons storage area, which also housed a structure which contained the bioweapons, which is incredibly creepy, weaponized anthrax and plague and God knows what else,
right,
in that same shoot-to-kill zone. one of the photographs that I took there, I hope it is posted, is one from the 80-foot observation tower within the WSA. Again, that was the location where UFOs were first seen. Now, the account that's about to come out, the one that you'll be speaking to Nick about,
right,
involves Peniston and Burroughs, who were directly involved. As it goes, John Burroughs, a law enforcement police officer, where Larry was a security cop, the difference between the military equivalent between a civilian police officer and a paramilitary police officer. John was a law enforcement cop, and he observed a light go down in the woods. Now, to the best of my knowledge, there was nothing to suggest a crash or an explosion. There was no ground concussion. There was no fire. There was no sound. But again, this was a very tense moment in the Cold War. It was a militarized area. And Burroughs very rightly radioed in his observation and asked for permission to investigate, which he did with Jim Peniston, who outranked him at the time. He was a sergeant, and Ed Cabanasak, who drove the vehicle into the area. They went as far as they could in the vehicle, and Jim and John walked in the rest of the area. Again, this is an account that is now about to be published, so I will leave it to them to give you the hard details, but what is on the record is nothing less than them encountering a machine of undetermined origin that was floating through the woods at about chest height, 7 or 9 feet at the base, tapering upward, triangular in structure, with the appearance of kind of a black glass surface. And at the base of it, a series of letter forms, hieroglyphics, symbols, whatever you want to call them, which Jim says that he copied into his notebook, and many of your listeners, again, are familiar with them because they've been used in quite a number of documentaries.
Mm-hmm. We'll talk about that in a bit.
Yes. John says that he went into a two-handed stance with his sidearm, then holstered it, and then, by some accounts that he has given, says that he impulsively jumped on the thing, and it went, 10 meters with him before he let go. Jim, and this is one of the most controversial aspects of the entire case, says now, and said for the first time in public the night of December 28, 2010, at a conference we were speaking at in Woodbridge, England, that when he touched the craft, a long binary code downloaded into his head, the equivalent of several thousand ones and zeros in a certain order, that he copied out into his notebook, which took up, I think, 16 pages of a small 3-ring binder notebook that he had with him. He never came forward about this until, 2010, although he had confided it to people since, I think, 96 or thereabouts. This is in itself an entirely separate controversy and a separate subject that I honestly have not even gotten to the point in the book where it is discussed.
Right.
But there is no question that both Jim and John have missing time, still feel traumatized to some degree by whatever it was they encountered out in the woods that night, and very prudently decided not to give a full report, which I can certainly more than understand, when they reported in. On the second night, a number of these unidentifieds came down in the woods. And I don't mean in some kind of ethereal, gossamery way. Where they did, they tore out parts of the forest canopy. Where they may have touched against trees, they tore off bark. And where they settled on the ground, they left impressions. In fact, when Charles Halt and his team were out on the third night, in an area not that far from where Larry Warren and the men that he was with were, Halt and his men observed one of these landing areas, and I think it was the next day or very shortly after, went back and made castor plasts of the impressions in the soil, which were circular and equilaterally spaced from each other. There were 3 of them. Certain idiots have put forward that it was chicken scratchings or rabbits, and if it was, then they understood geometry, and they were slightly radioactive. Because in the 3 impressions, and every place that these unknowns touched up against organic material like a tree, there was an elevation of times 10 the trace amounts of background beta and gamma readings. Now, they were still infinitesimal, but I should say that that figure was confirmed by the Ministry of Defense. That's not something I came up with. Other lights were observed over the area. The main 2 events on the 3rd night, well, let's say 2.5, the only woman to be documented as having been involved, Bonnie Tamplin, I think is the way you pronounce her name, was sitting in the cab of a militarized pickup truck when a light flew in her window and so traumatized her that she went on extended leave thereafter. Also, remember that these events all took place right in that period between Christmas and New Year's. And there was quite a round of, parties in the area. And Colonel Halt was at one of them and was approached by one of his people at the party and told they're back.
And that was the night of the 28th.
That's correct. And that is also the night where Larry Warren had his event. But they were different events. Halt, being a skeptic, understandably, and having heard, these accounts, decided he was going to see for himself. Went back to his quarters, changed into camouflage, called together a team of personnel, and they headed out into the woods with a Geiger counter, a night scope, and other appropriate equipment. And at a certain point, and also a microcassette recorder, like I always carried when I was there doing the work. And at a certain point, they observed one of these lights coming in over where they were. And at a certain point, it shone a light right down to the ground, right down to a few feet within where they were standing. This is all recorded, and as we discussed earlier, many of us have heard that recording or parts of it numerous times. It's become a staple of Rendlesham-related documentaries and television treatments. However, one thing that I don't think is publicly known is that Halt told Larry and I, when we met, that 14 or 16-minute segment was taken out of several hours of recordings that he made that night. One wonders if he will ever make that material public. Perhaps it's all fairly routine or mundane compared to that actual event that they were involved in. But I, for one, hope that he does, and I hope he can find a way to get paid for it. Why not?
There's one reason, well, there's a lot of reasons why we want to hear the rest of that tape, but maybe Larry is speaking in the background.
Oh, no. The men are all identified. Larry was at least several hundred yards away. And
so Larry doesn't know if he was in any type of close proximity with Halt, or was he always at a distance?
Oh yeah, he was always at a distance. That's never been in question.
Well, the only reason why I bring that up, because as you start to put the facts together in the case, the different versions of the story, Larry. If you go and you look, and again, this is just from my memory, so just help me out, Peter.
Sure.
The original picture or that drawing that you had in Eastgate, that UFO craft, for Larry to describe it like that, wasn't he standing close enough to Halt? Because Halt's description...
No, Halt was not involved at all in the incident that Larry was involved in. They happened on the same night, but they might have been a quarter mile away from each other, more or less.
Well, but this is my okay. But what I'm getting at is the description of the craft is different.
Oh, yeah, it was a different craft.
Okay, so, but, okay, all right.
Also, Halt's was in the air. Larry's ultimately was on the ground.
Okay, all right. That's the, for me, that is Halt's out, and that's Larry's out. That is two different craft.
Their events were completely separate.
Right. Okay. So let's continue to move forward. Okay, let's stay with Halt's version, and then we'll go to what happened with Larry.
Sure. Basically, that is it, and Halt's version has been published. He has spoken about it at conferences and in television treatments, and he certainly has gone on record as saying, and if I'm misquoting him, it's by a word, that whatever he and his men saw that night was not built by any government on this planet.
Whoa, you okay?
Yeah, just cleared my throat.
Okay, so the issues that I have, not so much. I mean, I think Larry came forward first, and I commend him for that. That book and everything that what was it called? The first one, Clear Intent. Clear Intent. The book in 1983.
Oh, the first book to come out on the Rendlesham case was Sky Crash, which came out in 1984, and it was written by three women, English women, Jenny Randalls being the best known, Brenda Butler, who was a paranormal investigator who lived right in the area and was the first one to hear the rumors very shortly after the event and start to put it together, and Dot Street, who worked on it with them. That book came out in 1984.
And for what about Clear Intent? Wasn't that
Clear Intent?
That was Barry.
The book. It was a separate book written by Larry Fawcett, who enters into the story, and his writing partner Barry Greenwood.
Yeah, Barry Greenwood. That's it. That's it.
It's a somewhat dry but a very good book on the UFO cover-up, and was one of the first serious books written by a respected pair of researchers to address that particular question, but it was not a Rendlesham-related book.
Right, and if Larry hadn't have come forward, and with his version of this, I mean, this is where I'm a believer. Is Larry? The incident happened. The incident happened. And Larry came forward. He knew all of the details. If it didn't happen and it was just something that was, lights from the lighthouse or whatever, all of those guys were familiar with the surroundings on that base. We're talking about trained killers. We were talking about that earlier, actually. Those guys are
military specialists, to be sure.
Familiar with their surroundings.
Yes.
And so the incident really happened. And Larry's version of the events are Larry's versions of the events, but he knows the details of what went on.
Well, he knows the details of what went on for him. The reason that he was able to put together a fuller picture was, in full violation of his orders, he continued to ask questions.
That's my point.
And to nose around where
Yes.
the other men towed the line.
Now, and this is where, and I want you to be open as you can.
Absolutely.
When we're talking about Halt and Peniston,
You mean Burroughs and Peniston?
Burroughs and Peniston. Well, Halt too, but
absolutely separate entities.
Yeah, separate entities. But when we're the original tapes, when you listen to Halt and the way that they are dealing with everything in real time, and thank goodness those weren't confiscated and he didn't reveal that.
Oh, I agree, and you can hear the stress in their voices.
You can tell that these trained guys are dealing with something that they didn't know what they were dealing with. No, they weren't trained for it. And so when you read the transcripts, and you do need the transcripts to follow through. But when you
it's been published in a number of places, including Left at Eastgate.
And so for me, that just says right there that the incident happened. And then when you deal with Peniston and Burroughs, this is where it gets
funky for me. So I don't know. I'm not asking you to defend. I'm asking you to tell me what you know, which is the writing on the bottom of that craft. There's no mention of any of that on the tapes. There's no mention of the only thing that is consistent for me on the tapes are the sparks and the description of the molten metal dripping off the craft, which is fascinating. But the writing, the going up and touching the craft, the downloading, the binary, all of the fantastical stuff came out way later. There's nothing about that in any official reports. There's nothing documented. And for what are we to believe? Why in that original Halt memo isn't there a mention of hieroglyphics? Why isn't there a mention of somebody touching the craft? Why isn't there a mention of somebody taking a ride?
These are great questions. Number one, and most important, Halt made the decision not to include that information. It was consciously toned down, compressed, redacted, minimalized. Remember, this is a respected United States Air Force officer, a deputy base commander of an important NATO base at a very tense moment during the Cold War,
doubt.
committing to paper on an Air Force letterhead a UFO incident that ran for several nights with stuff that to the uninformed mind would sound like science fiction.
But
for the
Peter...
same reason that Jim and John did not report the details of what they encountered, what they remembered, and what happened to them.
But don't you think that all gloves were off in that Halt memo? I mean, they're obviously talking about a UFO outside of the back gate. And so why not continue with the details? I mean, that's
number
the part.
One, you are asking me to put myself in the head of another individual in a very unusual situation.
Right.
And with respect to all involved, I can only make my best educated guesses. All I can say is if I had been the deputy base commander of that base and had made the decision, even as a courtesy to the Ministry of Defense, or to have something on paper should it blow back at some point in the future, that covered the fact that I was aware, I would probably do what Charles Halt did and minimize it. Also, not only should there be no surprise that certain things were not mentioned in that document or in his recording, remember Charles Halt was not aware of these allegations of Jim and John, of what they had seen, experienced, or felt about the event that they were involved in beyond the absolute minimum.
Right.
And there's no reason whatsoever any of it should have been on the recording made on the third night about an event occurring considerable distance away on the first night and involving separate personnel.
Well, and again, I know something happened. Okay, so I have to always I have to start off there. So
yes,
because I don't want to sound like
again a number of things happened that were completely independent of each other, and remembering that can help us all be less confused because we're not dealing with a single. It's not like there was a major UFO sighting or landing that was witnessed by, this many people. There was a series of separate events in different areas of the same general location over the course of 3 nights, most involving separate military personnel and, to a degree, independent civilian witnesses living in the area.
Well, okay. I guess I did. Yes. But what I was, where I was going with that is this: in Halt's description on the tapes, and again, I'm speaking directly here. Halt's descriptions on the tapes are amazing, and you can almost see what he's seeing by the way that he's describing things. With the molten dripping, the splitting up of the ships, and it's back, and now it's moving left, it's moving right, the red lights, and all of it is awesome, except the details that came out later aren't on Halt's tape, and I'm hoping that maybe with the other stuff that he's got, that maybe there are some more details there. But with the touching of the craft, and this is where I'm going right now, do you think that binary information actually happened? Do you think, because that's not on the tape, there's no description of anybody touching the craft, but it's a pretty, for Peniston to say something like that, and also there's question of the dates in his notebook too as well. I'm sure you've read about that. Did this binary download happen?
I don't know. And again, to be clear here, from my point of view, there is no reason whatsoever that we should expect or anticipate that any of what happened to or with Jim and John on the first night should be even remotely the subject of anything on the halt tape made encountering a separate phenomena with different witnesses on the third night.
Right.
As far as my opinion on the binary code material, first, considering that one of the things that has just been thrown at Larry for decades now is because on the night following the event, one of the men involved, a sergeant named Adrian Bustinza, who stood right next to Larry during their encounter, Adrian knew that he was never going to go forward with this, and he encouraged Larry to give part of his account as Larry's account, which Larry agreed to do to get the information out. Larry, being an honest person, made it clear several years later that part of the original account he gave, while authentic, was done at the request of the man standing next to him who had his own experience as well. Now, this has been used repeatedly and parroted by skeptics and debunkers and anybody who has wanted to attack my co-author as being boiled down to, you changed your story. Well, I don't consider that changing your story any more than Jim Peniston's waiting 30 years minus 2 days to come forward and say, oh, by the way, when I touched the craft, thousands of ones and zeros downloaded into my head. I remembered them all in order. I wrote them all in my little notebook, page after page after page. They have been analyzed and translated, and it's a message from the intelligences behind the events of December 1980. And I know, because they told me, that they are not extraterrestrials or from another dimension. They are time travelers from our future. Well, I was in the room when that statement was made, and let me tell you, the audience reaction was not good. It was almost 400 people, most of them local, most of them who grew up with that story as the major background story of their lives, whether they were 20-somethings or 70-somethings.
Right.
And many of them were furious. How dare you wait to tell us this? Or how could you not? And what is the message? Well, I can't tell you because we've contracted with Prometheus Productions to present it in a documentary next year. It wasn't there. We're going to tell it in a conference in 2012. They backed out of the conference. We're going to put it in the book that we've decided to write. No, they didn't write it. Nick wrote it with their help. So I imagine that it is going to be revealed sometime in the book that I haven't gotten to yet. I'm very perplexed about this, and I am sure, one thing I am convinced of is that Jim is convinced that this did happen to him and that it happened at that time. I don't know if that is factual. There's no way I can.
Yeah, I want to believe Peniston, and although I've stated enough, when I first heard the binary story, this was my reaction, Peter. Are you ready?
I am.
Come on! That was my
kind
reaction.
of my reaction, too. And of the 380 people in the room with me, overwhelmingly, I have stills standing in back of Jim on the stage, photographing the audience's reaction to his statement, and you can see the faces, and none of them are happy, excited, or smiling. If anything, just the opposite. It got quite ugly in the room for a while, I might add. The reaction was so dramatic. Again, I think Jim is convinced of the reality of this, but I have to ask myself the question, in two unlikely or maybe super unlikely possibilities, that time travelers from our future created this series of events in this English countryside area, and that for whatever reason they selected this one Air Force sergeant to carry a message from the time travelers from our future to give to the people of Earth, which I'm hoping is in this book as I read it. Again, I cannot say because I'm not at that point in the book yet. And that's one possibility, and he says he's said for several years now that he is going to prove it. Now, that's something else again, to prove. For me, that is like saying, and with respect to Jim, and if I am wrong, I will be the first person to apologize, and I will do it publicly.
I will do it too.
For him to say that I know that time travelers from our future created this event. I know it because they told me, and they've given me evidence, which I'm going to present to the world when I'm ready, is like saying, I have seen God's eyebrow. It is, for me, saying, if he had said, or if he had ever said, this is what I believe, this is what I think, this is what I feel, this is my theory, this is what my gut sense is, that would be one thing, and I could only respect that, because who am I to say that that's not correct? But that has never, ever been the case. It is, this is it. And anybody that disagrees with him, and it's happened to many people I know, the giant iron door on the Jim and John's Facebook page has swung closed forever, and they are excluded from that site. He is very martinet and kind of draconian about this, and that concerns me as well. I am adamant in my work and in my history as an investigative writer and a lecturer and a writer on this subject. After 37 years in this work, I am really clear how little I know. What I think I know is that we're not alone, and that there are reasons that the forces that be, world governments and military, have an investment in lying to us about it and keeping it secret. Do these other intelligences come from another planet, another universe, another galaxy, another solar system? Sure, why not? Do they come from another dimension? Sure, why not?
Of course.
Have they always been with us here on Earth? Also a possibility.
Absolutely.
Do I know? Of course I don't know.
Well, you have the same position that I have. But I want to do. I want to go through a couple of things. So and for everybody else over on the website, on the set of pictures, which part I see the forest on the bottom row. If we look at the ammo dump, the top row,
weapon storage area,
the weapon storage area, is that the forest in the background?
It's part of the forest, you bet.
And is the area where the incident happened? Can you see it in this picture? I'm just trying to get a reference. Okay.
Yeah. No, you can't.
Okay, and then
it's a big forest.
It is a big forest. Mm-hmm. Now the forest pictures in the bottom row. Take us through. You have this one panoramic shot with the three pictures that are pasted across.
Oh yes, yes.
Okay, so what are we looking at here?
Okay, that is a farmer's field called Capel Green. One can find it on a good Suffolk, England survey map. It is a very good-sized farmer's field. It is about a mile from the road that takes us onto the Eastgate Road that leads to the east gate of RAF Bentwater's sister base, RAF Woodbridge, which is where John Burroughs was stationed when he made the observation. This puts us about 5 or 6 miles from RAF Bentwaters, where Larry was during where his involvement began.
Right.
Now, this is as good a point as any to give you Larry's account in a nutshell.
Exactly.
Yeah. He had that afternoon or late that afternoon, I forget the timing, men who were going to go on guard go on something called guard mount. And it is a simple process where it's established that you are fit for duty. Now, for me, the late Phil Klass, the arch-famous debunker, actually at one point suggested that these guys, they were in their late teens, some of them in their early 20s, that they were blowing some weed in the, woods, and they were a little high, and, they mistook a lighthouse for a landed craft on the ground or whatever. That's not funny, and in fact, it's horrific. It's insulting to the men involved who were highly trained, patriotic military specialists. They weren't drafted. They joined the Air Force because they wanted to. All of them had been through extensive training for their jobs, and to suggest that they were high is an insult to them and to the United States Air Force. Now, the fact is that if you had, say, a little head cold, and you had taken an over-the-counter cold pill that afternoon, you would not be allowed to go on guard duty that evening or that afternoon. If you had had a sip of beer at lunch, you were excluded. From guard mount, Larry was put on a post that was rarely manned, but it was really a mark of how tense the situation was in Europe at the time. And I should take a minute to tell you what that is rather than inferring it. I invite any of your listeners that are interested in going online and checking out, say, the major newspaper in their area. For me, it would be the New York Times. Yours would be dependent on your region. The big international story that last week of December of 1980 was our concern over Soviet concern of a growing pro-democracy movement that was emanating out of the Gdansk shipyards in Poland. It was headed up by an unknown electrician who believed in democracy and who was risking his life to lead this cause, named Lech Walesa, who went on to become the first democratically elected president of Poland. Now, what we did not know was that their concern was at such an advanced state that more than 100,000 infantry and armored troops were massed along the Polish-Soviet border. And if the Soviets felt that this movement was getting out of control and getting into the political fabric of Poland itself rather than being isolated in a shipyard, they were prepared to roll and crush it, maybe in the manner that they had done years before 1956 in Hungary. The United States was very definitely concerned about this situation, so much so that if you had had access to the parts of the base where they kept fighter aircraft, you would not have found them. They were already at forward operating locations in West Germany. The base was on a red alert. Red is one step below black. Black is war. This was the case with NATO bases in the entire NATO establishment. This is the tension level that we were at as a backdrop to this series of UFO incidents, and remember also this violation of our treaty with the United Kingdom, that the United States had a huge amount of nuclear ordnance in Suffolk on that base when none should have been in England at all, that I am aware.
That's right.
That's the backstory. So Larry was posted to certainly one of, if not the most isolated
well,
postings.
you know, I just want to say really quick, Peter, that's
Sure.
That's a great point for the Philip Klasses of the world. That's a great point to bring up, and it is an insult to suggest, you know, that you had a bunch of guards at a nuclear facility just hanging out on the back gate, you know, hitting a bong. Yes. And, you know, that is completely wrong, because it was Lech Walesa, and what was going on at that moment in Europe was about as tense of anything that was going on. And those guys on that base were very serious gentlemen. And now that that doesn't mean that
Were
the
they
story
ever?
didn't get out of control. So
Yes,
I really
correct.
okay. So let's get back to Larry. Okay, so Larry, he was only on the base for a little bit, right? Just
He'd
a couple
only
of
been
weeks.
on the base for a matter of weeks.
Right.
And another series of early attacks that we've completely discredited was that he would not have already had his PRP, his personal, gosh, what is the acronym again? Essentially, it is establishing that he is authorized to work the jobs he was being trained for. Now, one thing that we did not want to go into, but ultimately had to because it was an embarrassment to the Air Force, was shortly before Larry arrived on the base, a number of security personnel were busted on drug offenses, and they were removed. And so they needed bodies. They needed people to work the job that Larry was being trained to do. So he was not only continuing his on-the-job training at the base, coming from his basic training in Texas, he had been assigned a weapon. He was working the job as well as learning it. And we actually have the documents that establish that in early December he had his PRP. And again, there are people that said he wasn't even there. Well, he was there, and it's fully established in the records. In fact, one of my favorite witness accounts, going back to the event in the woods that Larry was involved in that I'm going to be getting to, was from another very honorable member of the security cops, Steve LaPlume, which was, I know you were out there because I saw you there. Again, Peniston and Burroughs were not there. So for them to insist that Larry was not where he was when Larry was is nonsense. And the same way that if I said, Jimmy, you know, I don't believe that you were in Burbank last night, how would I know? I'm in the center of New York State. That's an extreme example, but I know you get my point.
Right, right.
Anyway, in fact, in February, Larry and I returned to Perimeter Post 18, where he was posted that night. And it is an incredibly remote area at the far end of one of the two runways, the long runway. And he had been assigned, as would be the case, a Motorola radio. He had his M16 with him, and he was looking out. It was very close to the base perimeter fence, and at some time after midnight, he was radioed on his Motorola that he should shut down his post, and he would be picked up by military vehicle shortly and taken for another assignment. Not long after this, a military pickup truck arrived, being driven, as I recall, by Lieutenant Bruce England, who was involved in this event, and Adrian Bustinza was on it, who stood next to Larry in the field. And they were driven to the base motor pool, where a number of other vehicles were already doing what they were ordered to do, which was attach a military light-all to the back of their vehicle. Now, a light-all is a gas-operated, portable
lighting
version,
rig.
yeah, of what most of us associate with like an old-fashioned Hollywood premiere.
Yes.
All of the gas tanks were topped off. The vehicles left the motor pool, headed for the main entrance of the base. I should say this was a moonless night, and formed a cordon, a line of vehicles, and headed off into the night. The men involved, of course, not knowing where they're going. Larry and others speculated it might be some kind of military exercise.
Right. How many guys? How many trucks? How many?
I don't have an exact number, but the number of men could have been, well, several dozen.
Right.
They rolled through the village of Ike, a very small village between RAF Bentwaters and RAF Woodbridge. And here's another place where we are able to triangulate some very important proof. Larry and I stayed at a bed and breakfast in this village repeatedly for several decades. And the people who ran it went on to become very dear friends. In fact, I consider them family and stayed with them 6 weeks ago when I was back in the area. They're very dear to me. They had just moved into that area several months before. And having 3 young sons at the time, all grown up now, of course, they were very aware of this convoy rolling past, because there's no sidewalks. Literally, it rolled within a few feet of their house, waking them up. The reason they remembered it so well is that it had never happened before, and it never happened again. The convoy continued on toward the sister base, RAF Woodbridge, and as it got close to where, had they wanted to go on the base, they would have made a right turn on East Gate Road and proceeded to the point where John Burroughs was on the first night. They encountered a roadblock. A Air Force MP was holding up a small white Ford Cortina, a Ford that is not made in this country. Larry said they could see that there was a woman and a youngster in it, and that they were being told that the reason for this temporary holding was that they had discovered unexploded ordnance in the woods and that it was being removed. Now, that might sound like a ridiculous excuse if you are not familiar with the fact that the Battle of Britain had been fought over this area in 40 or 41, I'd have to check my books there, and that unexploded ordnance, German and British, is still being occasionally pulled out of the woods or out of farm areas. Pretty unnerving, but factual.
Right.
Once they were allowed to proceed, they and the other vehicles continued past Eastgate Road, probably less than 100 yards, where you make your left onto a logging road that runs about a mile. Halfway in, it widens, and that is where the vehicles pulled up and stopped. Now, at this point, the men were ordered to disembark their vehicles, and at this point, I should note that in leaving the base with fully loaded automatic weapons, these men were in violation of our standard military treaty with a foreign country.
100%.
It is, of course, all right to carry a loaded weapon on the base, but
Right.
not off the base.
Right.
An armorer's vehicle, essentially a pickup truck with racks welded on the back, pulled up, and the weapons were collected. Men were broken up into three-man teams, unarmed, each with a Motorola radio. They were then told to head that way into the woods and, quote-unquote, investigate a disturbance. And this is where lives began to change forever and where they entered the twilight zone. Larry, who allowed me to question him and re-question him and re-question him and interview him to the point where he wanted to strangle me at points, I wanted to make sure. I had to cover my behind as well as know in my heart as well as my mind that this guy I was working with, that at the time I had no interest in being friends with. I mean, we did become spectacular friends going through what we did over all of those years, and we remain like brothers and stay in regular contact. But as far as I was concerned, Larry Warren was the angriest, most obsessed person that I had ever met in my life, that something had happened to him when he was 19, and his entire life was geared to try to find out what the hell it was. As they're walking into the woods, they experience a static electricity reaction that is so powerful that, you think about that standard thing of taking a child's balloon and rubbing it on your arm and the hair on your arm goes up. We've all done it. We've all seen it. These were young guys, obviously. The security cops do not wear helmets. They wore berets. And one thing that probably they all had in common was they had good, healthy, thick heads of hair. The static electricity charge was so virulent that it was, in some cases, starting to push the berets off the heads of the men involved, my co-author included. At a certain point, Larry remembered hearing a man crying, and they came upon a military personnel being comforted by another one. The man who was breaking down was kind of sitting with his back to a tree stump, was kind of curled up, and the other man was trying to comfort him. They walked past them, and then they saw the forest starting to break away and a farmer's field in front of them. Now, in that field was a self-contained, large oval-shaped, glowing ground fog. Let me say that again. A self-contained fog sitting maybe a foot or so off the ground that was glowing.
So you could see the edges of the fog.
You could see the entire thing.
Yeah, that's what I mean. You could see the edges. You could see the shape. Okay.
You could. I mean, it was like a glowing little cloud on the ground that was maybe, 30 feet across, 25 feet across, oval.
Now, at this point, how far were they from the farmhouse at this point?
Probably a good 100 yards. The farmhouse, as they came out of the woods, would have been off to the left, and they observed lights on the second floor of that farmhouse.
And didn't Larry say something like, and again, just correct me if I'm wrong.
Sure.
I think it was Larry. Might have been Bustan. Anyway, that they thought the people at the farmhouse were witnessing this.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. It was well after midnight at this point. I believe it was a weekday night. These are farmers. The probability is that they would have been sleeping, and that you would not have been able to observe, a glow coming from the second story of the house at that time of night.
Right.
So I think that's just a fair deduction. We don't know for a fact. The men were then ordered to surround the ground fog. This, when I first learned about it, was disturbing to me. And even the fact that there seemed to be a procedure going into place here. There is an order to form something called a broken arrow situation, covered wagon, where men are ordered to surround unsecured ordnance, even nuclear ordnance. I think it probably comes from that old sensibility of, throw yourself on the grenade to protect your buddy in the First World War in the trench. But here they are being ordered in a military situation to surround a self-illuminated ground fog. I should also say here, aside from there being no moon, there was, except for that light, that little light coming from that farmhouse at least 100 yards away, there was no ambient light. They were a full, probably a mile and a half maybe from RAF Woodbridge, and 5 or 6 miles from Bentwaters. They were not near any village at this point within, a lighting area. And they held their positions. Now, after a while, the men observed a reddish light coming in slowly from the direction of the North Sea. And I can only imagine the level of surprise or tension as they observed it coming in closer and closer to where they had been ordered to stand, to the degree that at a certain point it came in directly over the ground fog. 30 feet up, I think, maybe thereabouts.
At this point, did Larry or any of the other troops, because my memory serves, there's 30, 40 guys out there, right? Motorola's, did anybody radio back to base at that moment what they were seeing, or was...
There was a certain amount of radio traffic also. They had a number of personnel had brought some of the light-alls out to the field. None of them would work.
Right.
There were Air Force personnel with cameras, 30 still cameras, movie cameras, and a video camera. And in 1980, video cameras were huge and bulky. There was no mistaking them for a film camera. Once again, this has been denied. Chuck DeCaro, who was the crack military and technology reporter for CNN for many years, who covered this story in depth, told Larry and I, and is very public about the fact that Ted Turner had authorized him to spend something like $200,000 of CNN's money, and this is very early on in CNN's history, to produce a 3-part special report on the Rendlesham Forest incident, which was aired, as I recall, in early 1984, and which Larry appears in. Now, Chuck told us that relative to the Air Force denying that they had taken pictures, that he was able to establish that they had. They then said, well, all the film came in fogged, which it may or may not have. I don't think it did, based on a certain amount of separate knowledge. And so there were even 2 Woodbridge policemen wandered into the area, one with a 35 millimeter camera, They were forcibly escorted out of the area, and the film was confiscated in the camera, although probably none had been used. So at this point, I can only imagine, like Larry, the other men involved are observing this red light coming in now very close over them. At this point, without a sound, the light explodes with such magnesium brightness that, you'd reflexively avert your eyes for a moment, like a wall of old-fashioned flash bulbs. And so there's several seconds where, your eyes readjust and where you can see again. Now, at this point, sitting in the ground fog is now a structured craft. It is fully three-dimensional. It is right there. Larry described the surface of it as kind of like mother of pearl, and that it played tricks with your vision. It seemed that if you moved, your shadow moved but a few seconds or a second or two later, which is nuts to start with because there was no light behind anybody. And a number of the men ran off into the woods at this point. Others held their ground. I personally think I would have been one of the ones to take off. Yeah. And this is now a different situation. These men are very close, 20 feet or so, maybe less. This is not like they're, 50 yards away from this machine of undetermined origin. Larry described it very poignantly as looking both old and new, that you could see pipe fittings and areas where metal adjoined metal, but that you could only really see it best if you turned your head to the side and looked at it with your peripheral vision.
Didn't he say it was covered with tiles, like the space shuttle or something?
That's one of the reports. Again, everything here for me is informed by the physiology of human shock and the fact that they, for lack of a more descriptive term, my knowledge, if you want to call it that, mostly gleaned from many years of working with Bud Hopkins and meeting with, not hundreds, but over the years, hundreds and hundreds of individuals that had had close encounters, experiences, or abductions, that these intelligences have the power to affect our thinking. And this may have been part of that. But there stood this thing in the field. Now, going back to the CNN special report, the standard reason that is given for Larry's event never happened is how come the other men haven't come forward. Well, let's remember, Larry came forward publicly in 1983 and then became a public pillory for this. He was attacked in every way imaginable. If I had been involved in that event, I certainly wouldn't have wanted to follow in his footsteps, but to say none of them have come forward is simply not true. If you do a Google search of CNN Bentwater special report, you should be able to bring it up fairly quickly. At a certain point, a Sergeant Gulius, who is not identified in the footage, and who was smart enough or frightened enough to have his voice modified and his face kind of fuzzed out, unlike Larry, who appears under his own name, full voice, and, full facial recognition. Gulius says what we saw represented some kind of life form or something. I'm off by a word or two there, but that is a statement that went on CNN in 1984, and yet it is always ignored because if you mention it, it gives Larry's story credibility, and we don't want to do that. This is the guy that we've got to take down. He earned the enmity of so many people who didn't want this to come out, and without him, I don't think it's extreme to say it would have never come out. It probably would have come out sometime or another, but possibly not for many, many years, and who knows in what form and to what degree a cover-up might have been able to offer a shiny object and present it as the real explanation, and let's look the other way, folks. Now, after a while, Sergeant Ball, who was one of the NCOs on location, went up to Larry and Adrian and ordered them to accompany him in for a closer look. Closer look. These guys are like 20 feet away, and they walked to within 5 feet or so.
Adrian was Bustinza, right?
Yes, exactly so. And Adrian, by the way, although he has never gone fully public with what he saw, what he remembered, what he experienced, last year, John Burroughs made a post that he had spoken to Adrian, which he certainly has at times, as has Larry, as have other men involved.
Have you?
No.
Okay.
No, Adrian has never wanted to speak with me. We know who each other are. I wish him well. He wishes me well, and I respect that. I'm not going to try to insert myself into his life. Why would I? He has made it very clear that he's not interested in speaking with, book writers like me. Nonetheless, last year, John Burroughs posted on his and Jim's Facebook page that he had spoken to Adrian, and Adrian had told him that Larry was not there. This got back to Adrian, and I think it must have caused considerable embarrassment to John, because Adrian then made a statement that was made public, that in capital letters, yes, Larry was there. And so were you. And, so was Jim at different points. Adrian was involved on a number of the nights, unlike Larry. Now, after a while, men are tapped out and ordered to go back to the staging area, to where the vehicles were.
And tapped out means, for everybody out there,
meaning the sergeant came up behind them and tapped them on the shoulder.
Right, you're relieved.
Ordered them to return to the area. I've forgotten one important detail, though, another point of contention, which is that remembering a round of parties was going on, and certainly would have made sense that there was one on the night of the 28th for late Christmas or early New Year's. A vehicle drove out into the field, and out of it stepped a considerably tall officer, described as anywhere between 6'2", 6'4", not in uniform, but in evening clothes. I mean, very filmatic. And he, unarmed, stepped through the cordon of men. And I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm sorry, Jimmy.
That's okay.
At a certain point, and you'll remember this from your reading of the book, Larry, Adrian, other men standing around them observed a glow coming from the other side of what I can only call a craft. And as that glow grew, it started to move slowly. And at a certain point, it became visible. And there were 3 distinct shapes within that glow. And Larry is a wonderful writer, and he really worked hard on his part of the book. And I must say, for me, the curse of Lefty Skate, for me, was also the blessing. It took so long to write, but at the same time, we had an opportunity to grow as writers, to revise, to add material, because it didn't take a year or two, it took 9 years. And I have just opened the book to this point, and I want to read into the record Larry's remarks about this particular moment. These beings, let's see, let me get right to that point. Okay.
Pins and needles. We can't have silence in radio.
Okay, no. Oh, man, very good. Now a glowing ball of light, bluish gold in color, came slowly from behind the right delta of the object. It moved with deliberation and purpose, about 1 foot above the ground. It stopped about 10 feet away from the machine, and I noticed something strange within its glow. I thought, why are kids there? Why are there kids here? Bustinza asked under his breath, "Can you see them?" I saw their eyes, and I knew that they were definitely not kids. All personnel seemed in a trance and just watched them. The glow had faded a bit, so their features were easier to see. The one light then broke into 3 separate glowing cylinders, each containing what appeared to be a living creature. They were small, about 3 to 4 feet tall, and somewhat ghost-like in appearance. And it goes on from there. Now, some have said this was an implanted memory. Well, who am I to say that it wasn't? However, years later, Larry and I returned to this spot, and the photograph that we're talking about that triggered this in the field, that composite photograph that shows a large green ellipse in a field that's gone to hay, the rest of the field is yellow,
Yep.
was taken 9.5 years after the event that I've just described. And ultimately, I returned to that area and drew something like 20 pounds of soil and packed it in appropriate laboratory containers that I had from Springborn Environmental Laboratory in Wareham, Massachusetts, the lab that I had contracted to do a full workup and analysis of this soil. I took soil from what we'll call the affected area that Larry and I had labeled Ground Zero at the time, ironic.
What part in this panoramic shot of the composite shot, where you have the little cluster of trees on the left-hand side that's sitting out in the middle of the field, you've got this little red spot in the back, some kind of a red spot.
That's actually wild poppies, that little red spot in the back.
Okay. Where was the fog and
exactly where the green area appears, not close to it, exactly where the green area appears.
Well, now that's interesting. Okay.
It's very interesting, and in fact, what I'm about to tell you constitutes the best physical evidence that anyone, Tennyson, Burroughs, Halt, any of the other witnesses, any of the other researchers, any of the other authors or writers have ever come up with to establish the absolute reality of a fully anomalous event happening on that spot on the third night. And it goes like this, and this is so important to me that I want to take you back to that afternoon in February. Larry and I had already been in England on our very first trip, and when I returned in this past February, it was, it was 26 years to the week from when from when we first went back there, 33 years after the event, 26 years for me from the first time I returned there. So it's now the day that we're going to walk out to the field for the first time. We've been doing other things leading up to this. Larry had not returned to that field since the event had happened. And as you might imagine, he was in a pretty reflective state as we walked through the forest. He wasn't chatty, and I wasn't going to intrude on his, thoughts. We walked with a certain amount of quiet as a real go-getter on this, and being very excited about being on this location for the first time and feeling, pretty full of myself and professional. I had a notebook, I had my camera, I had film, and most important to this, though, I had a micro-cassette recorder in each pocket. Machines break down. I didn't want to miss anything. These conversations that we were having that week, I knew would be important for recreating that week, doing treatments, giving transcriptions, and so they were. And at a certain point, the recorder's on, and we get to that same spot again where the trees are starting to break away, and I'm seeing Capel Green for the first time. Now, this is 7 months after I shook hands with Larry on doing the book. I've been doing armchair research in my apartment on East 46th Street, between 1st and 2nd in Manhattan, but now I'm there. And I know this field. It's been drummed into my head. I know where the stand of trees is. I know where the farmhouse is. I know where the big oak tree is that Larry used as a marker for that night, and very majestic oak it is. And at that moment, and this is not that photo. This is a photo taken in February of '88. That big green spot one is taken in June of '90. It's a fallow field, no crops, and it's plowed. Larry's right arm shoots out reflexively, Jimmy, and he points out into the field, 100 feet or so. It's close. And he says, it sat right there. And then you can hear on the tape there's an absolute dead pause. And he follows up by saying, but of course, that's a coincidence that area that I'm pointing at is discolored and, kind of oval-shaped. Now, the way I've trained myself to do investigations, my first reaction was not, oh, my God, look, there's a mark from the UFO that landed 8 years and 2 months before. Anything but. My thought was, yes, that is a coincidence, and there are ways to account for it. Perhaps it's a play of light. It's tilled soil on a sunless afternoon in an area where there may be a certain convex or concave quality to that part of the field. Maybe lightning struck it 6 months ago. Maybe they dumped a ton of nitrate fertilizer there and it was graded out. But the last thing I would think was that there was some things still in the soil that you could see. But I took a picture, and I'll send it to you to add to the pictures that you have, as well as replacing the ones that didn't come through, of that field on that day, and you can see a discoloration at that spot.
How large is the spot? I can see the tracks. Obviously, that's from a car or a truck or a tractor.
Sure, it's probably a tractor.
So that we're looking at 30, 40 feet maybe across?
I'd say it was, at its widest, I'd say it's about 25, 30 feet across.
Yeah, okay.
It's a huge field and, a big hunk and green spot.
Yeah.
And we walk out into the field, and we probably spent 2 hours there. At one point, I gave Larry the recorder. He stood on the spot where he remembered it happening, and I asked him if he could relive it. And it was incredibly poignant, and it actually made me quite sad. I have a photo of him while he is giving this account on tape, and it's all in the book. And I thought, good God, what has this guy gone through? I can't imagine, but it is so with him. He is so obsessed about it. It is driving his life. It is more important than anything. His first marriage had already gone belly up, and his second one was destined to in the future. He was wrestling with drinking. He was suffering post-traumatic stress in no uncertain terms, and your heart just had to go out to him. But as we continued to walk around the field and we continued to look back at this area, you could always make it out as not the same appearance as the rest of the field. Now, I was shooting 35 millimeter film at the time, black and white, and I had like half a dozen little, plastic containers that we used to get film in. And I also had my micro cassettes that have little tiny labels to label the cassettes, and I thought, I'm very clever here. I took samples from the discolored area where Larry's event had taken place, and then control samples from 100, 200 yards out in the field, and so on. When we looked at them one next to the other, looking into these containers, that's when it got more dramatic. The soil looked different. When you rubbed it between your fingers, it felt different.
Well, what do you mean it looked different?
Well, it's a different color. One was, sort of brown. The other was brown-orange. Plus, the normal soil, let's call it, the soil that dominated the field, when you felt it, you could feel the moisture in the soil. The other was absolutely dry, and it either felt like dust or it clumped into really tight little clumps that you really had to work to break up with your fingers if you could at all.
So which was the dry? The dry came from the green patch?
Okay. The affected.
Now, so you're saying that, and I'm looking at the picture here, so right a couple of feet into the tan grass or whatever foliage, that was regular soil.
Absolutely normal.
And why would stuff grow in dusty, nasty soil?
I can tell you the scientific reason for that.
Okay, tell me. Talk to me.
Yes. Well, first I'll tell you that we brought it back, obviously, to our B&B. Tony Warnock, our host, was a science instructor at a private school, what they would call a public school, what we would call a private school in Woodbridge. And he asked to look at the samples, and he took one of the affected samples, one of the control samples, and took 2 pieces of clean typing paper and dumped out soil on each one. Well, it was immediately apparent to all of us that they really look different now, especially under, a desk light. I then asked Jan Warnock to loan us 2 equal-sized jar lids and a tablespoon, and I did a very simple experiment. I filled each jar lid with essentially an exact same amount of soil, 1 from the affected area, 1 a control sample. Then I added the exact same amount of water to each. With a few stirs, the control sample became mud. Nothing more to say about it. Honest to God, the affected sample, I worked that for 2 or 3 minutes, even with the back of the spoon like an apothecary, and I could not get it to become mud to save myself. It either sunk to the bottom in clumps or floated like dust on the surface. Now, this was exciting. When we got back to the States, I found a laboratory that did soil analysis, and I called them. Again, feeling quite excited and very professional and pretty full of myself, I said I would like to have some soil analyzed, and, how do I go about it? And she said, how much soil do you have, sir? And I said with great pride, 6 film canisters full. And as nicely as she could, she said, oh, sir, you've never done this before. We need 15 or 20 pounds of soil. I was crestfallen.
All right.
And it took a while for me to get back there, again, with the proper containers and instructions from our laboratory technician, a man named Matthew Moniz, who became a friend and who has continued to do work with people like me, as well as Bud Hopkins, Colin Andrews, and done quite a number of analyses of soil that has been affected by an anomalous
The farmer didn't mind you going back and grabbing
the farmer
a couple
didn't
hundred pounds?
know. And
Okay.
when we finally met the farmer in 1997, they made it clear that they minded very much.
Of course.
And to keep the hell out of their field from then on.
Hey,
and,
Peter, I there's one question before I
Sure.
let it get away from me.
Yes.
Did you ever go and interview the people at the farmhouse?
The people in the farmhouse quite simply disappeared shortly after this event.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean they moved with no forwarding address. And it was years before any investigator was able to locate them. In fact, it took so many years that a number of us, and I don't consider myself a paranoid or necessarily a conspiracist or thinking the worst or the darkest, we were concerned. A number of us were concerned about their safety, but ultimately they were found and made it very clear that they had absolutely nothing to say and never would about the night in question, and that is where that part of the story rests.
Huh.
Now, the soil that I collected was analyzed by a credited scientist who still does this kind of work. He lives and works in Massachusetts. The results that he gave us were quite life-changing for me, and I continue to hold them up, especially with triangulated evidence that I'll add at the end, as the best evidence we have of a truly anomalous event taking place as part of the so-called Rendlesham Forest incident. Number one, he said, yes, the soil looks different. That is, however, not uncommon in farmers' fields for any number of reasons. Now, he agreed that not only was it difficult to reconstitute the affected sample to make it mud, but that even under laboratory conditions, it was extremely challenging. The reason for this, he said, is that something had happened to this soil that had caused it to lose its ability to retain moisture. Next, they did seed germination tests with the affected sample and with control samples, in some cases using indigenous seeds to the area, wheat, rye, barley, etc., or just any neutral kind of plant. In the control samples, everything normal. Rate of growth, size, structure of plants, all just what you would imagine. In the affected sample, every seed that they did germination tests with took longer to mature, and only mutant strains of the plant grew. The plant itself, something had altered the soil enough that seeds grown in it were mutant strains of the plants. Now, this explained why that area was still green when I was lucky enough to walk into the area on that return visit a year and a half later almost, during growing season. And everything else had already gone to hay. The rest of the field, again, was yellow, with the exception of a few patches of wild poppies.
What year did you draw the samples?
Okay. The samples were drawn in, I think 1991. I'd have to actually check left at East Gate. But it was a return trip after photographing them in June of 1990. So remember here, the samples were drawn more than a decade after the event. Okay, going on from here. In certain soils that one finds in certain locations, there are tiny, let's say, sand-sized grains of metallic particles. It's just the way it is there. In the control samples, it was absolutely what it should be for that part of the United Kingdom. In the affected sample, it was in excess of 4 times plus the amount of tiny metallic particles that they found in the control samples. When I asked our laboratory technician what that indicated to him, he said he could only make one logical deduction, that something had sat on that spot and exerted such a powerful electromagnetic effect that it literally pulled these tiny metallic bits into the area. And he said, I want you to visualize something. It's not like somebody stamped down on this soil in the area, but, soil is pretty dense. Imagine you're something as big as a grain of sand. What it would take to pull you inch by inch by inch through the soil into another area, pushing past so many other little grains, that impressed me. The final result was, for me, the most science fiction-like and the one that really cemented this for me. This occurred in a field only 5 or 6 miles from the coast. And, of course, one should anticipate that the composition of the soil would have a certain percentage of sand, which all of the control samples did. Jimmy, there was no sand in the affected sample. It was silica. It had been reduced, in the words of our lab guy, to an interim form of glass. The sand in the soil, where this thing sat,
right,
where Larry and his men, the men with him stood, had melted. Now, a few final thoughts here. Our first visit there was in February. In, I guess, late that summer in September, Larry gave me a Xerox of a map of the field from an English survey map. And there was an X on the spot where it had happened, which was part of the Xerox. It was an X that he had made some years before. It was marking the precise spot that we're talking about here. In November of 1987, a little less than 3 months before we went to the area, Larry drew me a map of the field where everything was placed. The craft had been, cameras, men, and that marked the exact same spot. Also be aware that the first generation audio microcassette recordings that we recorded that day, including the one of Larry's arm shooting out and him saying, it sat right there, and then the silence, and then him saying, but of course that's a coincidence. On 2 separate occasions with 2 separate technicians, most recently, I guess 2 years ago or so, those audio tapes were put through voice stress analysis, which in some states carries the same weights as polygraph. It is used by the Justice Department, the FBI. I know the New York Police Department uses it, other law enforcement areas as well, some not. But there was nothing, and I stress nothing, in those tapes to indicate that there was anything false or misleading or inaccurate or unauthentic about what was recorded by us that day on those tapes. Now, that's called triangulation in terms of taking a whole bunch of physical evidence that you can confirm to a specific site,
sure,
where an eyewitness, confirms, and then overlaying it with paper evidence in terms of maps that were given before the fact. And for me, this is so exciting, and I don't think I may never have another situation in my life as an investigative writer or UFO researcher per se where I am able to come up with anything as authentic. Again, I'm only in the first part of Nick's new book, Encounter in Rendlesham Forest. I don't know if they offer any physical evidence. Also, one last thing. When Larry was looking at this red light coming in, and it burst into this amazing brightness, it burned the retinas of his eyes, which immediately hurt. In fact, there's a remark in the book where they're going back on the truck, and he said when he blinked, he could almost hear a click. His eyes were very, very dry, and they hurt. The next day, he requested an appointment for an exam. Being the military, it didn't happen right away. It happened early February of, several weeks after, and it was at the RAF Lankenheath Eye and Ear Clinic. And it is, we have Air Force Form 490, I believe it is, which is essentially an appointment, a medical appointment form with a place for the attending physician or examining agent to fill out whatever they're going to fill out. And on that form, it says very clearly, OPTI/RET burn/EXP, optical retinal burn exposure. Now, if that had been something that his retinas had been burned before he went into the service, that certainly would have been picked up in his initial Air Force physical when he joined up. It was not. And you take that piece of evidence and overlay it on the rest, and I present that as not just the best physical evidence about the Rendlesham Forest incident, but uncontestable evidence about Larry Warren's involvement in a very real event on the third night, no matter what anybody else says.
Besides Bustinza, how have you been able to collect any other names? Doesn't Larry have a list of names? He had to know a couple of other guys there besides.
Of course. And again, there is Adrian, who has come close to confirming Larry's story. There is a long interview with him with Larry Fawcett in Left at Eastgate. And Larry Fawcett, and I leave this to the reader to make their own deduction. Don't take my word for it or anything. In fact, always use your good common sense and critical thinking, for goodness sakes, and don't take any researcher's word for it. Do your own investigation. But I know the feeling, and the fact that Larry Fawcett is he's retired now. I hope he's still well. I think he's retired to Florida many years now. But he was a police lieutenant, certainly knew about doing a interview. I have probably conducted several hundred interviews in my professional 35-odd years in this field. I'm not trained. I've trained myself, but I'm good at it now, and it took me some time to get there. But I do know that feeling, especially in those first years, where you're onto something. You're doing an interview with a really credible witness, and they're giving you a great account, and you let your enthusiasm run away from you, and you start to interrupt them, or you will, rather than just a nod or an or a look, you'll just start to have a conversation with them, and it will throw it off. It will break it. And there is a point where Fawcett is amazingly close to getting Bustinza to confirm Larry's account, but he pushes too hard, and you can read it between the lines. I've listened to the tape, and the enthusiasm in his voice and the excitement, I think, caused, Adrian to pull back. But again,
what about Gordon Williams?
Well, Gordon Williams is the officer that Larry says was the one who was, the one to enter into that area and face off with these small beings,
right?
Completely peacefully. Now, when Gordon Williams, who basically was more protected from this than any other officer who may have been involved, and the fact is that Williams left the base several months after the event. Williams was the not the commanding officer. He was, what's the term? The flight officer. It's in the book. It's escaping me at the moment. In charge of, all flight-related activities. He was a colonel at the time, was transferred back to the States to another position, and while Charles Halt went from being a lieutenant colonel to a colonel in 12 years, Gordon Williams went from being a colonel to a 2-star general in a few short years. Now, after he retired, for many years nobody got close to him in the work, but ultimately a friend and colleague who wrote yet another book on this, who I'm sorry to say we lost to cancer several years back, Georgina Bruni,
right.
Who wrote a book called You Can't Tell the People. Georgina was the first person that Williams was willing to meet with in terms of the UFO world, and actually came to visit her at her apartment in Kensington. As Georgina described it to me, he was very charming. He gave her a gift, which was, very ironically, an official RAF Bentwaters hat purchased from the PX, but on the back of it, on the back strap, he had embroidered the dates of the event. And when she asked him flat out, were you involved? Were you in the field that night? Williams looked at her and she said to me, and this is absolutely factual, that with a hint of a smile, he said, I will neither deny nor confirm my involvement in the event, which struck me as very non-standard. If it had been me, and I think the logic may appeal to or make sense to many of your listeners, I would have said no, I wasn't.
Of course, of course.
It's so interesting. I would have loved to have seen it. It sounds amazing. Next time something like that happens, let me know. And Williams has not been heard from on this since. He certainly hasn't gone the route of Charles Halt, who, has spoken at UFO conferences and done documentaries. This, to the best of my knowledge, was Williams' one statement to a very credible person in so many respects, of keeping her hanging and playing with her a bit, it sounds like to me, relative to his involvement or lack of same in the event.
What about Donald Moreland? Whatever happened to him? Was anybody ever able to chase him down and verify that he was a real guy?
Oh, yes, he was definitely a real guy, but I don't know. I have to remember here that some of my original research on Left at Eastgate dates back over a quarter of a century. The book was first published in 1997, and a revised, updated, and expanded edition came out on the 25th anniversary in 2005. So forgive me if I don't have all the facts at mind. Again, I point you back to Sergeant Goulias, who was there in that circle, who did say what we saw that night may have represented a life form of some kind, etc. The fact is, and I'll say this here, I have spoken to two of the other men who were there that night, and they have confirmed what I have told you that Larry has put on the record, and they don't want ever to go public on this, and I am compelled to honor that.
Why?
Why?
Yeah.
Why? Because I gave my word.
I understand that. You understand.
I know. It's so frustrating for me too.
I mean, it's the thing. You need for everybody concerned here, and not only Larry, but you've got Charles, you've got Jim, you got John, you've got everybody else.
They all have pieces of the puzzle.
They do, and so if you know what's the worst that could happen? I would start dropping names. That's just me. I know your name is, your honor is involved, but at some point, for everybody concerned, there's 40 other guys that were there and witnessed that night, and I just can't imagine that every single one of them is either forgotten or
I don't think you ever forget it.
Right, exactly. Or, which is my point. Or that they were so threatened, they're out of it's 35 years ago. They should be out of the service now. They should have been, they're retired. What's the point? Why can't we get these guys to come forward? And I don't know.
Let's take this back to another point as well, and I absolutely appreciate, respect, and feel your frustration. I felt it for a quarter of a century now. The following day, Larry and another one of the men, Greg Batram, who was also on D-Flight in the security cops, Larry was already quietly talking to the other guys about what did you think, when they were all told not to talk to anybody, even each other, about this, and certainly not to any outsiders. That next day, Greg accompanied Larry to a public phone booth on the base, and Larry called his mother in upstate New York. Now, Larry and his mom are close, and he wanted to share this with her. Again, the truth was more important to my co-author than obeying the rules, and that has been held against him as well. You know, he's disloyal. He's a traitor. You put the Air Force first. You follow orders. Well, where would the world be if certain people hadn't followed orders and let us know certain things that were going on that we, the people, should have known about and didn't know about?
Well, there's one
thing. As
thing.
I'm concerned, Larry's a patriot.
Absolutely. We're not dealing with nuclear secrets here. We're not dealing with troop placement, along the Polish border.
Well, to a degree, we were dealing with nuclear secrets, but I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Larry reversed the charges. Again, this is back in the day when making a transatlantic call was something of a big deal and cost. And he's starting to talk to his mom and tell her about it, and bang, the phone goes dead. He's thinking, what the hell? He's pissed off. He calls the operator.
Oh, was that the incident? He was at a payphone, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He indignantly, on the base, and he indignantly asks what happened. He was cut off on a transatlantic call. The operator nicely asks, were you calling from a payphone on the base, sir?
Right.
And he said yes. And she said, oh, sir, if you were cut off, it was from within the base. Larry thanks her, hangs up, looks at Greg, and says, I'm, followed by a single-syllabled word that I can't say on the air, a great Anglo-Saxon term for we have a problem here, and goes back to his residence, where not long after he is informed that his presence is requested at the law enforcement building, where the head of law enforcement, sitting at his desk, Larry sits opposite him, and he says, we know that what you men went through, and of course I'm paraphrasing here, it was very stressful last night, but you were ordered not to discuss this, and you did. And Larry looked at him and said, no, I didn't, sir. And he said, yes, you did, and pulls out one of the low drawers on his desk, and there is a reel-to-reel tape recorder, and he presses a button. And it is the tape recording of this very brief call between Larry and his mother. The officer, who I think really acted very appropriately and very human, said, we appreciate that this is obviously stressful for you, but you have violated an order and we can't let it go. So, we have to do something here, and I'm going to give you a choice. We can take away your Airman First Class status, and you can start at the beginning, or we can fine you a modest amount of money, which I believe was $300, which we will take out in increments from your pay. Larry, feeling that he'd never reach that rank again if he gave up it, opted to take the financial punishment. And when he left the service, and the document is presented in Left at East Gate in one of the appendices, and it's a wonderful story, he owed $86 or $93 in change. Now, jump ahead several years, I think it's 1985. He gets a letter from the Air Force Office of Finance in Colorado saying, dear Mr. Warren, when you left the service, there was an outstanding debt of $93.47, whatever it was, and you are obligated to complete payment of it. If you do not, we will turn this matter over to the IRS. Can you imagine? For under $100.
Oh, man.
Larry, thinking on his feet, God bless him, responds that, oh my gosh, you're absolutely right. I apologize. You're right. You owe me that money. Can you remind me of what that specific debt is for, and I'll get a check right out to you. They did not, and he did not.
Before I say thank you for coming on, I want to steal you for another 10 minutes. Can I keep you for 10 more minutes?
Yeah, and we haven't even talked about the debriefing.
Well, I did want to. You know what? Okay, let's make it really quick.
Okay.
Let's do the debriefing because I want to go over a couple of these photographs that you sent me from earlier today, and only because for all the listeners out there, we've got they're left hanging, so we can't leave them hanging.
I appreciate that, and if you send me a check for the same big amount I'm being paid tonight, I'll be happy to come back anytime.
Absolutely. Okay.
I've so enjoyed this actual real conversation with you, Jimmy. I look forward to returning your show.
No, absolutely,
whenever it's possible.
Absolutely, and I have this same feeling or same reaction with all the guests. You know, this is not the same 22 questions. You know,
heck no.
Right down in a row and so forth. Okay, so let's get to the debriefing, and I want to say really quick when I had read all of the accounts with Larry and calling his mom from the base, that's the one because I defend. I'm on Larry's corner, but
that's a pretty human thing.
But he stepped out of the box there. He was still
totally.
Yeah, that
he identified himself within 24 hours as being a potential troublemaker, and the potential stopped very quickly. He was.
Yeah. Now, after he gets out of the Army or Air Force and he's discharged. And then he wants to disclose things. That's a little bit different. It's about a UFO. It's not. It's about an incident. It's not nuclear secrets. On the same token, though, while you're still enlisted, that's you have to do as you're told. And
exactly. And he didn't. And for anybody that wants to hold that against him, be my guest. He violated his Air Force office, his orders. He put the truth ahead of following those orders. That's him. I respect him and admire him for it. I don't think I would have had the courage to do it. I think the whole story has come out because he went against the system and did that. You know, if you want to join the naysayers or the people that have attacked him for not being, proper Air Force personnel or again, putting the truth before following orders. Remember also that Colonel Halt, Jim Peniston, John Burroughs, God bless them all and good luck to them, they spent the lion's share of their adult lives working for the United States government. They are on pensions. There are things that they can and can't say even about this. If you ask any of them to talk about the nuclear ordinance on base, see what happens.
Right.
So,
By the way, just so you know, I'm an Army brat. My dad spent, he retired 30 some odd years in the Army, and
wow.
And so when Bentwaters went down, when Rendlesham went down, I was down.
Yeah.
I was at Fort Amador down in Central America, down in the Canal Zone.
Oh boy.
So, well, I'm just saying, I grew up in a military family, and I know what it's like. So
yeah, I don't.
Okay, let's get.
Although I had a crash course. Okay,
let's get to the debriefing.
And I know our time is very limited. Again, I encourage anybody that wants to get the full story here from our 9 years of research and Larry's 33 years, or at the time, 27 when the book came out, you have the opportunity.
Yeah, we have the links up. Everybody knows. You just go to Peter Robbins, go to his name, click on that.
But briefly, for those, it's not fair to leave you hanging, and people, of course, certainly won't read the book. That afternoon, men who were involved of that rank were called into the base law enforcement office. The head of law enforcement, I think that was Malcolm Ziegler at the time, left, and 3 debriefers came in. 1 in military uniform, 2 in suits. The one in the military uniform was not Air Force. He was Navy. He was a naval officer. The 2 in suits were with the Armed Forces, once again, the acronym, is essentially a field arm of the National Security Agency. And they basically told these men, what I am convinced, Larry is convinced, was disinformation. Now, please understand here, disinformation is not a lie. It is a very skillful mixture of truth, fiction, confabulation, designed to produce a certain result. And these men were told, true or false, that what they had observed, encountered, witnessed the night before did in fact represent other intelligences from off this earth that have come and gone with impunity since before they were born. At some point, yes, we hope we can be public with this, but it's going to be a long time. You are now part of the secret-keeping apparatus. Congratulations. And this is not a promotion. Your security codes, essentially they were told to not talk about it to anyone. And they were then told a very specific number, once again. For me, that is where bells and whistles go off. A certain number of other civilizations that come and go from Earth. Now, for me, I immediately thought, that's like tagging an animal. If several years from now I go forward and I say, by the way, we were told that 136 different civilizations are visiting Earth, and that gets back to the forces that be, they know it was that specific debriefing, and they've narrowed their field tremendously.
Exactly.
They were shown film footage.
What?
Clipped together with no narration, going back to very grainy black and white World War II footage, Korea, Vietnam, footage that was shot on or looked like it was shot on the moon. Again, it's film. Anything could have been doctored. But all of it included disc-shaped objects or anomalous objects interacting with, or in some cases causing the crash of a military jet, that one in Korea. When it was over, the film simply ran out. And they were told that they hoped that would explain some of it, but nothing beyond that was said. And then Larry asked, what happens, being Larry, if one of us does talk about this? And one of the guys in suits, Richardson, I forget his name, he looked at him and he said, bullets are cheap. Now, the first time Larry told me this, I didn't know him that well. Is this guy spinning me? Is he playing me? It's so theatrical. It's so dramatic. It's
well,
so
I thought
scary.
the first time I read that, I thought the same thing, and of course it was Larry that spoke up from everybody else that was in the room.
Here's the deal, Jimmy. Another one of the witnesses, Steve LaPlume, who not only was involved, but who will be speaking out on this publicly for the very first time in October at the New England UFO conference in Leominster, Massachusetts, his hometown. He was in the room with him, and he remembered that same phrase being spoken. And I have met with him in person, and he has confirmed it. They were told that. Now, very quickly, and this is a subject within this greater subject we could spend an entire another 2 hours on. That late that afternoon, early that evening, Larry was informed that his debriefing was going to continue, but privately, and that he should be out in front of his dormitory, and that two guys would, car would be coming. It was a late model black sedan with New York state plates on it. Not uncommon to see statewide plates in Britain on a base. And Larry observed Adrian Bustinza coming down the path from another direction. The guy who is behind the wheel gets out and says, "Are you Warren?" He says, "Yes." He says, "Let me see some identification." Larry's nervous response, and in your face to a degree, was, "Let me see some identification." The guy grimaced at him. He then noticed that the guy who was on the shotgun side had walked out and was coming at him from the side. And as Larry looked at him, he raised a aerosol canister and sprayed it in his face. This account is remembered in great detail in a remarkable regressive hypnotic session that Bud Hopkins conducted with Larry that I was witness to. And Larry went down. He had trouble breathing. He couldn't see. They threw him into the back of the car. The next thing he knew, he was in a moving car. The next thing he knew, he was inside. Then he was in a elevator. And it dropped so deep that his ears popped. I have spoken to many medical personnel and mental health professionals over the years about this, wondering if there is such a thing as an auditory hallucination, where they can recreate that feeling that you have, that I remember, going in an express elevator in the old World Trade Center from the 110th floor to the 60th floor, or that we have all experienced when we've been coming in from a flight and landing. And to the best of their collective knowledge, no. For the next 24 to 36 hours, Larry was missing. Friends who asked where he was were told that he was on an emergency leave. He was released from wherever the heck he was, which we deduce was very likely below the base, being put through a series of real or programmed events, many of which stayed in his thoughts. And to this day, he is not absolutely certain on certain things like John and Jim, which are real and which are Memorex, so to say. Again, I know we're over time, but you had wanted to address some things about the photos before we went off.
Okay. Well, okay, let's do that really quick. Again, thank you.
And I can come back and talk about this at another time. Also, you're going to have Nick Pope on soon. He's got this new book out. There may be questions that you will pose to him about things that you have asked me that he will have different answers for that we can pick up there.
Well, the main thing, he's going to have his version of events.
Oh, sure.
But the one thing that I have to ask Nick, and it would be disservice if I didn't, is which version is true? The version that the MOD, with their lack of and loss of documentation, what did he actually have in his possession? What did he really know? And then what is in the book? Because there's two different versions there.
Well, you're correct.
And
remember that Nick Pope, who is very patriotic, who, the Queen of England, Americans don't get this, and it took me a while to get it, but 25 trips to England, which is now a second home to me, and having him as a longtime friend, understanding that he worked for the Ministry of Defense for 21 years, and like any employee of the Department of Defense who retires, there are certain things that you are never going to speak of in a public realm. Nick is also the only person in the history of ufology who has been media trained to deal with the public on the subject of UFOs in the entire world. It makes him a very valuable player on a certain level. It makes him also quite elusive on certain things, because there are certain things that he will never fully come forward about, and that in his position, I'm sure I would follow the same path. He walks a very interesting line, and I feel, and I mean this in a respectful way, that he and the ministry over the years worked out a way to utilize each other. The ministry could always say, look, we have Nick Pope, who we allowed to write books. We had vetted every single word. He wrote 4 books on UFOs.
But that's
and
exactly
Nick can say,
it.
I'm Nick Pope of the MOD.
Right. And that's and so, or he could be the most masterful disinformation guy that we've ever come to know.
It's true.
Yeah, I think he's well spoken. Exactly. He's polite. He's nice to me.
He's a charming guy.
Awesome. And what a better spokesman,
But he is. Don't confuse any of that with the fact that he is a former employee of the MOD, and I don't know if the Department of Defense has a similar thing, but when you leave the MOD, based on your experience, your work record, the time you were in, you leave with an equivalent military rank. And as I recall, Nick's rank is lieutenant colonel. I mean, this is serious business. And I, again, as somebody who's fairly close, I am intrigued by the fact that we have a new book on Rendlesham, co-written by 3 people who have spent the lion's share of their adult lives working for their governments and are on pensions, and there are certain things that they cannot say even while they come forward and have the courage to discuss other things that they can say. It adds a whole nother layer to this story.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting show when he's on, and I can't wait to read the book. I'm a little jealous that you've got it, but
yes.
So
I found an advanced copy at my favorite bookstore in America, The Strand in New York, which does tend to get advanced copies, and I will send you a copy of part 1 of my review when I finish it, and then part 2 when I complete the book.
Chomping at the bit. Okay, the first UFO pick. You sent us 4 black and whites. We literally have 2 minutes.
Okay.
So picture number 1, 1950.
Oh, yes.
McMinn.
1950 is taken in McMinnville, Oregon. I have visited McMinnville repeatedly. It was taken by a farmer named Trent, highly respected in the community, high school education, salt of the earth. Never copywrote the photograph. Sterling reputation in the community. The Trent family still lives in that area. It is a fully authentic photograph of a UFO, one of 2, that flew over his property. And the combination of the moment, the fact that he chose or even neglected to do anything to ever make a penny on that photo, and it's been reproduced in countless volumes around the world as an authentic UFO photo, a favorite of mine.
Absolutely one of the coolest, freakiest of all time. No, seriously, yeah. I'm glad you chose that one. Okay, let's go.
I went with pre-digital in each case.
You have to.
Yeah.
Yeah, you absolutely have to.
Much harder to muck around with the chemical image.
Okay, Salem.
Yes, Salem, Massachusetts. A photo of 4 UFOs, glowing disc-shaped objects, ellipse-like, flying in kind of a check mark, sort of a shortened V-shape, over a United States Coast Guard installation and photographed by an official United States Coast Guard photographer. A famous photograph that, once again, is gilt-edged. All of the photographs of those 4 have gone through extensive photo analysis, I think in all cases, among others, by the distinguished Dr. Bruce Maccabee, former optical physicist for the Navy and really the godfather of ethical, scientific, UFO-related photo analysis.
Excellent choice, by the way. Okay, Brazil, 1952. Again, another great choice. I'm surprised at this one.
A brilliant articulated disc taken over a country with a phenomenally large number of not just authentic UFO sightings, but Brazil was so open about this subject and still is, like a number of our countries in Central and South America. They have a much healthier attitude about these things, and often the most authentic reports and photographs are issued out of government or military offices. This is a particularly wonderful photo because you can see detail on it. And it was so multiply witnessed, and I believe in a military context.
And still, one of my favorite of all time. Again,
it's so graceful, yeah.
And now we've got 30 seconds, and so I'm going to roll the music, and you just talk. One of the greats, of course, the Battle of Los Angeles.
Holy moly. 80 days after Pearl Harbor, an unknown comes in over Los Angeles. We now know from Japanese war records that they had no craft over the area. It came in, anti-aircraft batteries opened up on it. I think 1,600 rounds of ammunition were expended. 3 people died, one from a shell that fell in the wrong place, another from a heart attack. The thing seemed to be impervious to the repeated firing by naval installations and drifted back over the Pacific and disappeared.
The best part about that story, and I talk about it often, well, first off, I live here, is that
Battle of Los Angeles.
Is that picture is lost. The original picture is nowhere to be found. Hey, so just write out the music with this. I'm going to go through credits, and then we'll say goodnight. Stay tuned. Coming up next is Spooky South Coast with your host, Tim Weisberg. Tomorrow night, Annie Jacobson, Operation Paperclip in Area 51, and about her new television series with Chris Carter. Special thanks to Keith Rowland and Art Bell. Fade to Black's executive producer is Rita Kamarian. The show is produced by Hilton J. Palm and Mark D. Kovar. Announcers are Steve Harder and Mark D. Kovar. Music is Right Now, Doug Aldrich. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Dark Matter Radio Network. Thank you, Mr. Peter Robbins. Say goodnight, Peter.
And sleep well, brother.
I'll talk to you soon.
You bet.
Good night, everybody.